a bit of disapproval. I thought I'd check in and see how you're doing, dear, Linda said, stepping over a baby toy. Tom mentioned you might need some help. Thanks, Linda. Things are a bit crazy, but we're managing, I said, trying to hide the stress in my voice. Linda walked into the kitchen, and the sound of dirty dishes seemed louder than ever. It looks like you need more than just a little help, she said sharply. This place is a mess. Is this how you plan to raise my grandson? Her words hurt, and I felt even more overwhelmed. I'm doing the best I can, I replied, holding my son closer. Linda let out a long sigh. Sophia, being a mom is about setting priorities, and right now, it looks like you're not prioritizing anything. I was about to say something when Tom, my husband, walked in. Seeing the tension, he quickly tried to calm things down. Mom, Sophia is doing a great job. It's been hard since the baby hasn't been sleeping well. But instead of calming down, Linda turned to Tom. You need to help her understand what's important. It's not just about cleaning, it's about being responsible. She's not meeting the family's expectations. Tom looked at me, then back at his mom, unsure what to do. Mom, please, can we not do this right now? Sophia is still recovering. But this is the time to teach her, Linda said, raising her voice. If she learns now, she'll handle things better later. You can't go easy on her, Tom. Tom hesitated, then said, maybe you're right, Mom. Maybe Sophia does need to learn the hard way. The words sounded strange as he said them. Exactly, Linda agreed, gently pushing Tom toward me. Show her that this kind of behavior isn't okay. I barely had time to react before Tom's hand hit my cheek. The sound echoed in the room, marking a terrible line that had been crossed. I held our son close, his cries blending with the rapid beating of my heart. Tom, what are you doing? I managed to say through my tears. The pain from the slap was nothing compared to the feeling of betrayal. This is for your own good, Sophia. You need to learn, Tom said, his voice empty, avoiding my gaze. The room went quiet except for my baby's soft whimpers. Tom looked at me with a mix of frustration and embarrassment, while Linda stood firm, her expression unreadable but unyielding. What started as a casual visit had turned into a harsh critique of my parenting and my worth. As Linda prepared to leave, she whispered something to Tom at the door. I couldn't hear it all, but her tone and Tom's worried look told me it wasn't supportive. That night, as I rocked my son to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. What should have felt like a supportive family now felt like a trial, and I was the one on trial. As I cared for my son and felt the sting on my cheek, I started to think clearly amid the chaos. I needed a plan, a way out, not just for my safety, but for my little boy's well-being. The house that had once felt like home now felt like a trap set by the very people who were supposed to love us. After Tom slapped me, influenced by Linda, I couldn't stand the thought of sleeping next to him. I took my baby and went to the nursery, which had been a safe space for the past few weeks. As I rocked my son back to sleep, the day's events replayed in my mind, sharpening the pain and betrayal. The next morning, while Tom was at work and Linda was presumably busy, I made a call. Jessica answered on the second ring. Jess, it's me. I need the help you offered, I said, my voice trembling but determined. Say no more, Sophia. I'll come by today with my truck. We can store your things at my place until you decide what to do, Jessica replied, her voice strong and reassuring. The plan was simple, but risky. I would pack as much as I could during the day, focusing on what my son and I really needed. Jessica was going to help me move everything to her place in the evening. We decided it was best to leave before Tom came home from work, knowing he might try to sway me with apologies or that Linda's influence might take over again. As I packed, every outfit and baby toy felt heavy with memories and what-ifs, but the memory of Tom's slap and the look in Linda's eyes reminded me that staying was not an option. By late afternoon, most of our things were boxed up and hidden in the garage. Jessica arrived just as the sun began to set, her presence a light of hope on one of the darkest days of my life. Ready? She asked, taking in the scene of our life reduced to boxes and bags. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, holding my son a bit tighter. We worked quickly, loading the truck with the speed and teamwork of a well-oiled machine. The nursery, my safe space, was the last room I cleared. I took a moment there to say a silent goodbye to the life I had hoped to build with Tom. As we drove away from the house, I watched it fade in the rearview mirror, a chapter closing with a heavy but hopeful heart. My baby slept quietly in his seat, unaware of the change, but finally safe. This was the first night of our new life, one where fear and manipulation would no longer have power. At Jessica's place, my resolve grew stronger. The peace and support I found there were a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere of my own home. In this safe space, I began to plan how to expose Tom and Linda for who they really were. My goal was not just to escape, but to ensure they couldn't twist the story to their advantage or hurt anyone else. I started by reaching out to family and friends under the pretense of catching up. I quietly recorded any mentions of Linda's behavior and Tom's unusual obedience to her. Some family members were cautious, but many didn't realize how much control Linda had. Over the weeks, these pieces of evidence started to create a clearer picture. I collected text messages, voicemails, and recorded calls. I even got a damaging video of Linda coaching Tom on how to handle me, showing it was more about control than concern. With everything in place, I chose the location for the confrontation, a family gathering at Tom's sister's anniversary party. It was a neutral place with enough family members present, some of whom had privately expressed their discomfort with Linda's control. On the day of the gathering, I was extremely nervous. I arrived with Jessica, who agreed to support me. The greetings were polite but lacking warmth. The tension about Tom and Linda's recent issues was felt by even the most distant relatives. After the initial small talk, I stood up, my hands shaking but my voice steady. "I have something important to share with all of you today," I began. Every eye in the room turned toward me. "It's about Tom and his mother, Linda, and how their actions have affected me, my son, and the whole family." Tom looked shocked and scared. "Sophia, let's not do this here." He tried to interrupt, but I pressed on, pulling out my phone. "This isn't just a family issue," I said, connecting my phone to the Bluetooth speaker. The room went quiet as the recordings played, Linda's harsh orders and Tom's hesitant agreements about correcting my behavior. The reactions ranged from shock to disgust. Tom's aunt, who had always liked me, looked especially betrayed. "Is this true, Linda? Were you forcing Tom to do these things?" Linda's face turned to a mask of anger and panic. "These are just taken out of context." She tried to deflect, but then Tom's cousin, who had been quiet until now, stood up. "No, they aren't. We've seen signs of this for years. We just didn't want to believe it." The confrontation changed everything. Relatives began sharing their own experiences, slowly revealing how Linda had manipulated the family under the guise of concern. Tom sat there, pale and silent, finally realizing the web his mother had spun around him. As the family meeting turned into a heated discussion about Linda's control, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. The truth was out, and not just for me. Everyone who had been affected by Linda's toxic influence could now see it. The evening ended with promises of support for me and my son, and a clear message to Linda that her control was no longer welcome. After the confrontation, everyone was left with a quiet, somber realization. Tom's family, long under Linda's sway, now saw her manipulations for what they were. The shock was clear, and everyone felt uncomfortable as they came to terms with how deeply Linda's influence had affected their lives. For me, the decision to leave Tom was painful but necessary. As the family gathering came to an end, the finality of my choice became real. I gathered my son, who was blissfully unaware of the turmoil, and with one last look at the family home, I stepped into the unknown. Tom watched us go, sorrow and resignation in his eyes. His voice, once so familiar, seemed distant as he whispered a quiet goodbye. Linda, on the other hand, faced a much harsher reality. The family she had controlled for so long now turned their backs on her. Each member felt betrayed and had to face the trust they had misplaced. Linda was blamed for tearing the family apart, and her attempts to regain control were ignored. The evidence and the testimonies shared at the gathering were too powerful to dismiss. In the weeks that followed, Tom tried to reach out. His messages were a mix of apologies, pleas for forgiveness, and promises to change, but the memory of him raising his hand against me was too strong to forget. The echo of Tom's mother's influence and his actions created barriers too big to overcome. The trust was broken, and with it, the foundation of our marriage. I found refuge in a small apartment, far from the neighborhood I once called home, a place where no one knew my story. Jessica remained my rock, helping me through this new phase of life. My days became focused on simple routines, caring for my son and rebuilding a safe world away from the shadows of the past. Healing was slow and often painful. Some days, the weight of everything felt too much to bear, but the freedom to make choices without fear of manipulation or abuse pushed me forward. I went to therapy, joined support groups for single mothers, and slowly, the broken pieces of my old self came together into someone stronger and more resilient. My son's laughter became my anchor. Each milestone he reached was a bright moment, guiding me forward. As he grew, so did my confidence in the future, one that I was now shaping on my own terms. Months passed, and one evening, as I put my son to bed in our cozy apartment filled with drawings and toys, I reflected on the journey. The pain of the past was still there, but it was overshadowed by the light of new beginnings. The support of friends and my son's unconditional love had created a safety net that caught me on difficult days. Sitting down with a cup of tea, I finally felt ready to share my story. I started a blog, a place to talk about my experiences and connect with others who might be dealing with manipulation or abuse. With each post, I stepped further away from being a victim and closer to becoming an advocate. As our story of resilience comes to a close, I want to leave you with a question. Do you think it's possible to fully break free from manipulative family dynamics, or do the shadows of those relationships follow us forever? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content on real-life issues. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to light. Thank you for watching, and let's keep the conversation going.
Thomas began to regain consciousness, but couldn't understand where he was, in this world or the next. There was something in his mouth that prevented him from swallowing. His eyes felt like they were filled with sand, and his eyelids were so heavy that they could hardly open. Bright light shone into his eyes, and everything around him was white. Maybe I'm already dead and in paradise, the man thought to himself. Everything is so quiet. But then, why can't I wake up? And I don't feel my body at all. Suddenly, he saw a young girl leaning over him asking, "How do you feel? Can you hear me? Blink if yes." Thomas managed not only to blink but also to murmur something like, "Yes." The girl clicked something, and people around him began to fuss, pulling out the tube from his mouth and turning off the sensors that covered his entire body. The man breathed a sigh of relief and thought, "Phew, so I'm alive." A grey-haired doctor in a funny cap came in, examined the patient and smiled. "Well, Thomas, everything is going according to plan, and you have awakened." The operation was more than successful, although it lasted 6 hours. There were many concerns, as in such cases, the risk of rejection of a foreign organ is very high. But you were lucky. The donor's heart took root in you as if it were your own. It's hard to believe such success. Consider today your 2nd birthday. Now you will live for another 100 years. The man weakly smiled and thanked the doctor for his golden hands and asked about his donor. "Unfortunately, I have no right to divulge such confidential information," answered the doctor. "And don't ask me such questions again. It's not ethical. Be glad that you survived. Now everything will go well. You still have a period of rehabilitation, but meanwhile, you rest. I'll come and see you later." Thomas put his hand on his chest and listened. His new heart was beating like his own. There was a strange and disturbing feeling inside Thomas, because he was alive now, and someone had died. And a part of that person was now in him. He wondered if his character would change now, or if new habits would appear. And who was his donor? A man or a woman? How old were they? How did they live? They were no longer a stranger to him. Suddenly, Thomas remembered his daughter Jenny, and tears welled up in his eyes. He terribly missed his 6-year-old daughter, even though he understood that she was with her grandmother in safe hands. He wanted to hug his little girl, breathe in the smell of childhood, and kiss her beloved, fragrant cheeks. Memories of his youth rolled over him involuntarily, and his whole life flashed before his eyes. Thomas grew up in a wealthy family. His father had his shoe repair shop, and his mother had her grocery store. Thomas grew up in abundance, had the best of everything, as he was the only and late child in the family. He graduated from university and started a shoe business just like his father, but not with repairs, but with sales. He didn't prioritize quantity, but instead focused on quality. Everyone in town knew that his stores had excellent shoes. Business slowly picked up, and soon Thomas married a wonderful girl, Hope. She was from a simple rural family. His parents were not against such a match, as they themselves came from humble origins, and were sure that such a modest daughter-in-law would be a good mother and homemaker. Hope impressed Thomas with her affectionate smile and huge, sad grey eyes. The newlyweds lived well and almost never quarrelled. Hope tried to please Thomas in everything and was an ideal wife, but she often fell ill, frequently and for long periods of time. Even a small breeze would give her a cold, and any draughts caused kidney problems. Years passed without the couple being able to have a child. The doctors advised Hope not to have a child due to her fragile health, and Thomas loved her and did not insist. However, Hope had intentionally hidden her pregnancy from everyone, knowing that they would persuade her to terminate it. She wanted so much to become a mother, to finally kiss her baby's cheeks, to cradle her little one and give her all her love. When she was taken to the maternity hospital, Thomas was very anxious because a bad, oppressive premonition did not let him rest. He smoked cigarettes and walked back and forth along the hospital corridor, praying as best he could. 9 hours later, he received the news that killed him. Hope died on the operating table without regaining consciousness, but their daughter was miraculously saved. It seemed that Thomas's life was cut short at that moment, and everything faded away. The man was terribly grieved, but he never doubted for a second that he could take care of his daughter. Fortunately, Jenny was calm and not capricious, as if understanding that her father was already burdened. At first, Hope's mother, Helen, helped him take care of the baby. She came from the village for a month and taught her son-in-law all the intricacies of caring for a newborn, and after that, she often arrived to help him at the first call. She was a good woman, no doubt about it. Now Jenny was 6 years old. Thomas had been complaining about his heart for the last 2 years. Sometimes he had a sharp pain or a rapid heartbeat. He had shortness of breath, and performing basic household chores became difficult. One day things became so bad that he was taken to the hospital by ambulance. During an examination, it was discovered that he had inoperable complications with his heart and that he needed an urgent heart transplant. However, the search for a suitable donor often dragged on for months or even years, and many died before the operation could take place. No amount of money in the world could help. Additionally, the business required attention, and Thomas couldn't prioritize. But a month ago he was hospitalized again and called Helen, who immediately took Jenny to her village, as there was no one else to leave her with. Thomas's condition worsened, and even IVs and supporting medications could not save him. And then a true miracle happened. He was informed that a donor who was a suitable match had been found, and that he was being prepared for emergency surgery. Now that he had regained consciousness, he will live. Everything is still ahead. That other person will never open their eyes again, and only their heart beats and beats, as if constantly reminding of this. Upon discharge, Thomas approached the doctor again and tried to find out the identity of the donor, but he was refused and scolded. "Why do you make us commit a crime? It is not allowed to disclose, and that's it." However, this idea firmly settled in Thomas's head and did not let him rest day or night. First of all, when he arrived at his mansion, Thomas called his mother-in-law to make sure that his daughter was okay and talked to her on the phone for a long time. The girl was eager to come home. "Daddy, how good it is that you have recovered. When will you come for me? I missed you so much, and I want to go home. Grandma is good, of course, but home is still better." The man could barely hold back his tears and persuaded his daughter, "Wait a little longer, my little one. Listen to your granny and help her with the household chores. I will get better soon and come to you right away. Agreed? I miss you so much, my little kitten." Then the calls from work began. While Thomas was sick, his deputy, Hugh Flynn, was responsible for the company. He was a good professional, no doubt about it, but not an excellent person. Paul, the leading specialist in procurement, started telling Thomas what had happened in his absence. "I'm glad you're feeling better, and I'm looking forward to when you're back at the company. Because with Mr. Flynn, we're definitely going to the bottom soon, and my intuition has never let me down. Mr. Flynn almost made a deal to purchase low-quality Chinese material at a throwaway price twice already, and he wanted to carry it out like it was premium leather. Luckily, I realised in time and didn't sign anything. Otherwise, we would have lost a lot of money for sure. And the other day, I accidentally met him in a cafe. He was talking to our main competitor. What could connect them? It's not good. Please get better as soon as possible, and meanwhile, I'll keep my ears open." Thomas was surprised. "It's really strange you didn't tell me anything about it. Thank you for the warning. I trust you, Paul. Well, we'll be in touch." The next day, Thomas decided to take a leisurely stroll through the park. The doctor said he needed to walk to accustom his heart gradually to the load. He watched the fallen leaves rustling under his feet, so cheerful and colourful, how the wind rustled, and enjoyed the walk. Suddenly, a boy of about 7 ran up to him. He was so funny in his blue jumpsuit and crooked hat, clearly not from an affluent family, but clean, and his eyes were so mischievous, with a sparkle. The child handed him a note and shouted, "This will help you find out the truth," and quickly disappeared into the bushes before Thomas could even come to his senses from amazement. Thomas didn't understand anything and unfolded a crumpled notebook page. There was an address written on it, 45 Redwood Street. And that was it. It was not understandable from whom or to whom it was addressed. But something about the little boy seemed familiar to Thomas, though he didn't understand why. His heart raced as he made his way to the address, not quite sure why he was going there. The house was small but well kept, with a barking dog in the yard. Thomas knocked on the door, feeling terribly awkward about what he was going to say. He had only been given the address by a boy in the park, so what could he possibly say? It all seemed ridiculous. An elderly woman with a neat, short haircut opened the door. Thomas began to explain, but the woman interrupted him and pulled him into the house, exclaiming, "Hello, Thomas, my son. You've finally come. I was wondering if you would show up or not. Come in, take off your clothes. I'll put the kettle on the stove now." Thomas sat down, feeling completely lost. "Mom, are you crazy?" he asked. "I'm not your son. I know and remember my parents. They've already passed away, but you have nothing to do with them for sure. What are you talking about?" "I'll probably go. I must have the wrong address. Sorry." The woman started crying. "Wait a minute," she begged. "Listen to me. Your real brother gave you his heart, whether you understand it or not. And he died 3 weeks ago. Look, here's his photo, my Duncan. And I am your real mother. My name is Madeline. I gave birth to you and him. You are twins. Do you understand?" Thomas blinked repeatedly. "Not really," he admitted. "I grew up with the Crawford family. They owned a store and a shoe workshop. And now I am a businessman myself, also involved in the shoe business. I have been living with them, growing up, for as long as I can remember. There is even a photo of my mother holding me as a baby. How is this possible?" The elderly woman began to cry again and then told her story. "You see, my son, I am an orphan. I grew up in an orphanage with no relatives in the world. After leaving the orphanage, I worked as a painter on a construction site. I lived in a dormitory, and then we were hired to work on an apartment for a young, handsome, rich man. I was young and inexperienced, so I fell head over heels in love with him. He lured me with sweet words, flowers and candy, and seduced me. But then everything happened like in a TV series. I became pregnant, and he immediately acted as if he had nothing to do with it and didn't know me. Who was I to him? Just a worker, not even his equal. I had been hiding my pregnancy until the end, even lifting bags of cement at the construction site while carrying twins. Where could I go with 2 children? I had nowhere to live except the dormitory. I cried, sobbed, didn't know what to do. I even thought about suicide. And then my friend advised me to contact the Crawford family. They were childless and everyone knew it. They really wanted a baby. So I fell at their feet and told them everything. They agreed to take 1 baby and chose you. They had a lot of money. They processed all the documents confidentially and got me to sign a statement that I would never appear in their family or your life under any pretext. They gave me a lot of money, so at least I bought everything necessary for little Duncan, a cot, a stroller and children's clothes. And that's how you, Thomas, ended up with them. I gave you away to strangers with my own hands. Then I often thought of you, cried, but life gradually improved. I got married successfully after a year, but it was too late to regret. So you and your brother lived separately, not knowing about each other. I didn't dare to tell my husband the truth, and he died without knowing anything. He loved Duncan like his own, never hurt him. Our son was a good guy, kind, responsive and simple. If anyone was in trouble, he would always help. He married a nice girl and worked in a taxi. 3 years ago, he decided that after his death, all his organs could be used as donors. It was like he had a feeling. And 3 weeks ago, he was killed in a car accident. He was exhausted and fell asleep at the wheel. I still can't believe it. I'm waiting for the door to open and Duncan to shout, "Mum, I'm home." The elderly woman ended her story and cried bitterly from grief and sadness. Thomas was stunned. "I am sorry for your loss. Losing a son is a terrible sorrow. But who is this boy who gave me a note in the park?" Madeline sighed. "He's Duncan's son, your nephew. Now he's almost an orphan. I don't know how to tell him. He thinks his daddy went away and will be back soon. He's driving me crazy with questions. It's like a knife to the heart." Thomas was stunned again. "And where is the child's mother? Did Duncan have a wife?" Madeline cried again. "Of course, Barbara was such a good woman. She worked as a bookkeeper in a company. She always worried about her work, often took reports home, thinking they would appreciate her efforts. Instead, her cunning boss set her up, accused her of fraud, and they gave her a 5-year sentence. Like she made a phony deal and pocketed all the money. But it's pure slander. Duncan almost attacked her boss with his fists in court. Everyone knew that Barbara was incapable of such things, but nothing could be proven. So now she's languishing in prison for no reason, and she's also seriously ill with tuberculosis. The doctors say it's a severe form, and she doesn't have long to live. Some kind of evil fate has befallen my son's family. Only troubles and disasters. And that scoundrel, her boss, is living it up, driving expensive cars, changing mistresses like gloves, and he doesn't care about anyone but himself. How can such villains exist? Duncan worked 3 shifts and even drove a taxi at night, like he was crazy. He wanted to earn enough money for a good lawyer to help get Barbara out of prison, but he didn't have time. Thomas couldn't digest so much information at once. He asked directly, "How did you find out who received your son's heart?" "It's confidential information. I asked the chief physician many times, but he refused to discuss it." "I have an acquaintance who works at the hospital and she helped me," the elderly woman replied. "I begged and pleaded with her until she took pity on me. When I read your name, I felt sick to my stomach. It's unbelievable that one brother gave his heart to another and saved his life without even knowing it. Thomas was shocked by this whole story, and after thinking for a while, he asked, "So, what do you want from me? Money? But you rejected me, and I'm sorry, but I can't call you my mother. Another woman raised and loved me. Why did you decide to find me now after all these years?" Madeline lowered her eyes. "Forgive me, my son. Maybe you're right. Of course I shouldn't have started all this. I promised not to interfere in your life. We're strangers, I see that now. I just feel sorry for little Lee. I can't take it anymore. Everything has come crashing down. His father died. His mother is dying in prison. I'm getting old, and I'm afraid I won't be able to get my grandson on his feet. So I thought maybe you could help. After all, he's your nephew. I apologize for bothering you. Goodbye, my son, and forgive me for everything." Thomas grumbled. All right, forgive me for being rude. It just slipped out. Did I say I wouldn't help? I just need to think things over. You have to understand, I'm still in shock. Finding out in 1 second that my donor is my brother and his wife is on the brink of death, and you're my mother. My head is spinning from all of this. Let me collect myself and figure out what to do. I'll find out everything about Lee's mother, and I'll let you know. Your son's heart beats in me, and I'm forever in debt to him. So don't worry, I won't abandon you. I'll help. Don't doubt it. And we're not strangers at all. I just haven't come to my senses yet. Thomas slept poorly, dreaming of the little boy with mischievous, lively eyes. He was his nephew. What would happen to him now? His grandmother was already old, and everything was unclear with his mother. It's a pity about the boy. I should find out everything tomorrow, not to delay matters. It's strange that my life changed so dramatically after the operation. So many relatives appeared at once. And my mother! Thomas's head was spinning. But now it was clear why the heart had taken root so well. It was almost his own. Oh, Duncan. Thank you, brother. Thomas used all his connections and managed to get Barbara's case reviewed. Despite his wild weakness, he went to her company and started questioning her colleagues. He spoke with the new accountant, with the secretary. People like that always know and see more than all the other employees. By paying money, Thomas managed to obtain reports and papers for the period when Barbara allegedly committed fraud. He took them to a handwriting expert who conducted an independent examination, which revealed that someone had skillfully forged Barbara's signature on those very documents. And the secretary revealed that a certain Hugh Flynn had just at that time pulled off a big illegal deal and claimed that he suspected nothing, and only a cunning accountant had organized it all to get rich. Thomas was in shock. This was his deputy. It turned out that Hugh was succeeding on all fronts. Now it became clear to Thomas why Hugh could afford such a luxurious car of the latest model, and even his own yacht. Even he, Thomas, couldn't afford that, since he returned most of the profits to circulation. In a couple of days after speaking with his mother, Thomas found the investigator, the most meticulous to details and incorruptible, and soon the gears started turning. The case was reviewed and Barbara was found innocent. All charges were dropped and she was released. But it was too late. Barbara was almost dying, and they immediately transferred her from the prison hospital to the intensive care unit of the TB dispensary. Although the best doctors took care of her, nothing could be done anymore. Tuberculosis had completely affected her lungs, and she coughed up blood almost every half hour. Barbara could hardly get up and had a fever. Thomas was not allowed to see her because the disease is extremely contagious, but they handed him her farewell note. Thomas brought it to Madeline. Fortunately, Lee was at school. They sat in the kitchen, unfolded the sheet with trembling hands, and began to read. Thomas, I don't know you personally, but I've heard that it was you who took care of and did all the impossible, freeing me from prison. It's a pity it's too late, but still I am immensely grateful to you for ensuring that my son will not grow up with the stigma of a convict mother. Because I am not guilty of anything. It was all done by Mr. Flynn. He supervised our company, and I became only a pawn and a change coin in their dishonest game. I swear on my son's health, I didn't sign anything. I'm not crazy. It's all a forgery. I repeated this 100 times in court, but it was like they didn't hear me. I wish these people to experience everything I went through in these walls in their own skin. And you, Thomas, I beg you, on my knees, I implore you, don't leave your nephew and my little son. My mother-in-law is an excellent woman, but she is already old. It will be very difficult for her to raise her grandson alone. After all, my Duncan is not in this world either. One thing comforts me. We will see each other soon with him there in heaven. Bury me next to my husband. It's critical to me. Lee, Mummy loves you very much. You should always remember that. Listen to Grandma and Uncle Thomas. They are your closest and dearest, and I will watch over you and take care of you from heaven. I hug you so much, my sweetest baby. They both wept. Madeline sobbed, and Thomas swallowed his tears silently. Why is everything so unfair in life? Whispered Thomas finally. Why can't anything be done? Why should Lee be left alone without a mother who loves him so much? Just like my daughter, Jenny. Why do children have to suffer so much? Madeline asked quietly, Do you have a daughter? You didn't mention her, son. Would you mind if we meet her? She's with my mother-in-law in the village, Thomas replied. I took her there when things got terrible for me. I'll have to pick her up soon because she misses me so much. My wife died during childbirth, so it's just me and my daughter. She's the most important thing in my life. Why should I be against communication? We're a family after all. The next day, Barbara died in the hospital. Thomas ensured that the woman had a dignified farewell. Madeline insisted that Lee should be told about his mother's death, but Thomas strongly disagreed. This is wrong. Give your grandson the opportunity to say goodbye to his mother. He needs to understand and accept this. Otherwise, he won't forgive either of us for this betrayal and lie. And he needs to be told about his father's death. I don't know how to do it, but it needs to be done. After all, parents won't come back or be resurrected, and the child will live with false hopes. And can you imagine how he'll feel later when he finds out he was fooled and lied to? Softly as best he could, Thomas tried to explain to Lee what had happened. He told the child that his parents were now in heaven, like angels watching over him and loving him, but he couldn't see them. Inside, however, Thomas was breaking down, a lump in his throat, and his brother's heart beat faster in his chest, as if supporting him in this difficult conversation. But you know, Lee, I'm your real uncle, and Madeline, your grandmother, will always be there for you. You're not alone. We're together, understand? You need to be a man, be strong, hold on, but now, cry. Sit next to your mummy. That's what you need to do. Later, when you grow up, you'll remember this sad moment as the most important in your life. Besides, I have a daughter, Jenny. She also lost her mummy, and she misses her too. But together we cope, and you will too. Come here, my little nephew. Let me hug you. The boy trustingly snuggled up to Thomas, and it warmed his heart, as if he had hugged his own son. The child cried bitterly and sat quietly by his mother's coffin for a long time, telling her something as if she could hear him. Meanwhile, Thomas had already decided that he would take Lee home with him. He felt a tremendous responsibility for the boy's fate. A week after Barbara's funeral, Thomas went to the village for his daughter. Jenny, seeing her father, immediately wanted to jump on his neck. But Thomas just groaned and sat down, kissing, hugging, and stroking her curly, long locks. In the village, Jenny looked like a mischievous little boy, in ridiculous pants and an oversized jacket, all dirty, but happy and tanned. The man laughed heartedly and said, "My dear daughter, you look like a chimney sweep. Where's my little princess? Who's this little gnome? Come on, clean up, wash your face, change your clothes, and let's go." Then Thomas turned to his mother-in-law. "Thank you for looking after her. Did she misbehave too much? Please forgive me for not picking her up earlier. I was still weak after the surgery, and everything happened so fast. My head is still spinning." The elderly woman laughed. "Oh, come on, Tommy. My granddaughter brings me nothing but joy. She makes everything more fun, and time flies by. Look how rosy her cheeks are from the fresh air. You brought her to me from the city like a wilted flower, but she's shining. We get along well. She's a good girl, clever. How about you? Thank God everything ended well. I prayed so much to God, begging him not to take my son-in-law away from my daughter too early. She's already without her mother, and I don't want her to end up an orphan. Don't just stand there. Come and sit at the table. I'll feed you. And take my homemade treats with you. Milk, sausage, strawberry jam." Thomas was eating potatoes, pickled mushrooms with sauerkraut, and praising everything. "Oh, you're the best. You're a wonderful woman. Thank you for everything. I wanted to talk to you about something. So much has happened in my life in the past month, my head is spinning. Listen to everything and give me advice on what I should do, according to your conscience." And the man told his mother-in-law everything, about how his mother found him, about his brother and his nephew. "Wanting to adopt the boy is a noble thing. I approve of it. Just don't rush it. Let the children get used to each other. Bring the boy over for visits first. And as for your mother, don't be angry with her, Tommy. You can't change the past. It's her sin. Let her live with it. It's not up to you or me to judge. She probably couldn't do any different at the time when she made that decision. But you weren't mistreated. She didn't put you in an orphanage. She placed you with a good, wealthy family. I remember your parents very well. They were wonderful, honourable people who adored you. You weren't deprived of love. So what's wrong? Since she found you herself, it means she's not doing well. She misses you. Don't push her away. Support her. Try to understand and forgive her, and accept everything as it is." Thomas brightened up. "Thank you for your wise advice and for the delicious dinner. Well, let's go with my daughter. The journey is not short." They said warm goodbyes and Thomas took his daughter home. Jenny was happy, chattering all the way and entertaining her father with stories about her adventures in the village. A few days later, Thomas invited Lee and his grandmother to visit his home. He was worried about how Jenny would react to the boy, if she would be jealous, and his nephew might feel uncomfortable in a strange house. The man prepared carefully, bought and cooked a turkey in the oven, and prepared gifts and sweets for the children. At first the little boy was a little shy, but Jenny quickly cheered him up. The kids became friends and began enthusiastically assembling jigsaw puzzles, racing around the house, and playing hide-and-seek. For the first time since the funeral, Lee must have been laughing, and he was at least a little oblivious. Thomas breathed a sigh of relief. While the children were having fun, the man had a long and quiet conversation with his real mother. She told him about his brother, how he grew up, how he met his first love, and how he was looking forward to seeing his son in the world. Thomas showed his mother his childhood photos and photos of his wife. He expressed how bad he felt without her, and how hard it was to bring up his daughter alone. No matter how you look at it, the girl still lacked a mother's hand and motherly caress. Towards the end of the evening, the owner of the house decided to delight the children with a surprise. He shouted, "Kids, come here. I have a surprise for you. Here, I'm giving you both roller skates, and I suggest that on Sunday we go to the park to learn to skate." There was a squeal of joy, and Jenny and Lee rushed to unpack the gifts. The happiness was boundless. Madeline just threw up her hands. "Thomas, it's such an expensive gift. Thank you. You will spoil my grandson, and then what will I do with him on my pension?" "You won't have to raise Lee on your own," answered Thomas. "I was thinking, why don't you come and live with me for good? What's the point of being lonely together? It'll be more fun for me and Jenny, and it would be easier for me. I am always at work, and before I had to get out and hire a nanny for a few hours so that my daughter was not alone at home until I returned. This way, you'll look after her. So think about my offer until the weekend, okay? We're family now, aren't we, Mom? I'm not angry, and I'm not offended. We have to move on." Madeline was taken aback. "Thank you, son, for your kind soul, but it's embarrassing a little. I don't even know. Lee, do you want to live with Uncle Thomas and Jenny?" The boy nodded his head with joy. "Yes, I like it here, and Jenny will be my little sister. That's great." Madeline breathed out a sigh of relief and said, "All right then, let's try it. My grandson doesn't mind, and for me, it's only happiness to live under one roof with my son and grandson. So, on the weekend we'll move." Thomas quietly watched Jenny's reaction. She suddenly frowned and pressed her lips. This strained the man. Apparently the fitting of characters was ahead. After all, the daughter was used to all Daddy's love, and his time only for her, and now some brother showed up, and the grandmother, about whom the girl had never known. But said and done, Thomas was not used to throwing words to the wind, and soon they all began to live together. Strangely enough, he and his mother got along just fine. Apparently there was still a kindred thread between them, however thin and invisible, which tied them together. But the kids often fought. Jenny was very jealous of Lee for his father. As soon as he climbed into the arms of Thomas, she immediately climbed up there hysterically. She followed Thomas, not giving Lee any chance to capture her father's attention. Then the girl began to share the toys into yours and mine. Lee became sad again, feeling left out. The situation was heating up, and then Thomas decided to take drastic measures. Jenny was a stubborn and jealous girl, but she was also very responsive and honest. Thomas knew this about her, and one day he took both kids by the hand and said, "Get in the car. Today will be a sad but essential day for both of you. It's time to grow up. Let's go." He said it so sternly that the kids fell silent and didn't say a word the whole way. They arrived at the cemetery. Thomas brought both children to his wife's grave and began, "Look, Lee, Jenny's mum and my wife are buried here. Now tell me, daughter, are you happy without your mum? Don't you want her to be nearby to hug and caress you? It's sad when everyone in school has a mum but you don't, right? I'm right, aren't I?" Jenny lowered her head. "Yes, Dad, it's true. Even though I love you very much, more than anything in the world, I miss my mummy." Lee was watching everything silently and with obvious confusion. Meanwhile, Thomas said to the children, "Get back in the car. This isn't all yet. Don't ask anything. You'll understand everything soon." The man drove the children to another cemetery. They got out and he brought them to the fresh graves of Barbara and Duncan. He spoke sternly to his daughter. "Here, Jenny, is where Lee's mum and dad are buried. His parents died just a month ago. You have me, but Lee doesn't have anyone. Do you understand? You behave stupidly and cruelly when you throw tantrums and get jealous. Think about how your brother feels, and remember, you two are siblings. You must always stick together no matter what happens. Support, love, and respect each other. I love you both equally and will always be there for you. Now I am one dad for both of you. Clear? Lee couldn't hold back and burst into tears, remembering his mum and dad, while Jenny suddenly hugged him tightly and whispered, I understand everything. Forgive me. I won't do it again. Now we have everything in common. Toys, books. Dad says he loves us equally. Don't cry. Here, take this candy. It's actually my favourite, but I'll give it to you. Eat it. Lee smiled, wiped away his tears, and Thomas sighed with relief. He had doubted until the end whether such a shock therapy was necessary for the children. After all, they were too little. But at that moment he realised it was not in vain. The man smiled and said, Well, kids, let's say goodbye to our loved ones and let them rest in peace. I suggest we cheer up a bit. Go feed the ducks at the pond. Take a walk and eat ice cream. Who's in? The kids were happy and hurried to leave the cemetery because it was so sad and even scary there. Just don't tell Grandma about where we were, Thomas added. Let's not upset her. Let it be our secret. And about the ice cream too, because someone's throat hurt recently. They spent the whole day together, sailing paper boats, and Thomas taught the kids how to throw stones beautifully with a flip into the water. In the evening, they all ate a delicious dinner cooked by Madeline and talked about their adventures. The woman asked quietly, Thomas, how did you manage that? The kids became like siblings. Where did the jealousy go? I should knock on wood so as not to jinx it. Thomas laughed sadly. I just talked to them honestly and they heard me. After all, we're raising smart kids. The passions at home subsided, and Thomas decided to put things in order in his company. He bought several video cameras and installed them in the deputy's office, in the common smoking room and in the reception area. The businessman wanted to make sure and catch Hugh so he wouldn't wriggle out. No one knew about the cameras, and that was the point. A week had passed, and Thomas intentionally went to the office on Saturday, when no one else was there, to look through the recordings. And then his hair stood on end. Hugh, with his leg crossed and lounging in his chair, was chatting on the phone with someone. Don't shout, don't worry, everything will be fine. Our fool Thomas suspects nothing. I'll give him these papers in a few days. He'll sign them without a second thought. Do you know how many documents he signs in a day? So one more or less won't be noticed. And as soon as his signature is on there, it's a done deal. We'll make it look like the fool himself sold his store in the city centre at a throwaway price. That's it. And if anything goes wrong, we'll put it all on his secretary Carrie. We'll say the stupid woman typed the document wrong. It's not the first time. Everything went smoothly with the accountant Barbara, and it will work out here too. So, you owe us a bottle of Dom Perignon. Thomas realised that he had signed a whole stack of papers without looking at them just yesterday. Oh, what a fool he was! Did he really sell the store without even realising it? The man rushed to the reception area, searched through everything, but couldn't find the document he was looking for. He was almost in tears, and then he thought to turn on the camera recording in the reception area. It showed Carrie calling Paul, the purchasing manager. Paul, come here. Everything is just as you said. I've hidden the sales agreement, so come and get it to keep it safe. Otherwise Mr. Flynn will soon be looking for it. But as soon as Paul took the agreement and left, the deputy director came in abruptly. Carrie, is the director here? Did he sign today's papers? Can I get mine? The girl, as if nothing had happened, answered, Yes, of course. They're all in the blue folder. Hugh Flynn searched through everything and got angry, not finding the paper he was looking for. He yelled in a voice that wasn't his own. Carrie, it's not all here. I urgently need one document. Did you take everything from his desk, or as usual are you in the clouds?" The girl calmly answered, "Don't yell at me. I took everything that was there. If your document isn't there, maybe the director is still reviewing it. Do you want me to ask him? What's the name of the document?" But the deputy just grumbled, "No need, he's reviewing it. I'll come back on Monday." Thomas breathed a sigh of relief and immediately called Paul. "I know everything, Paul. How did you know it was fake?" The man happily replied, "Because I've been working for you for 10 years, and I know you wouldn't sell the best store in the city centre for a few pennies. So Carrie and I confiscated that document, and I was going to bring it to you on Monday. And then you can decide what to do with it." Thomas was furious. "I think it's time for Hugh to be punished for all his tricks. It turns out he's done this before, and an innocent person suffered and died because of him. A child was left without a mother, and he didn't care at all. The scoundrel will get what he deserves. And to you, Paul, thanks a lot. And you know what? Get ready to be my deputy. I need loyal people like you, and I'll give Carrie a raise. Thank you guys, from the bottom of my heart." On Monday, Thomas took all his evidence to the prosecutor's office, and the deputy director finally answered for his crimes. He had been under investigation for a long time, trying in every way to avoid punishment. However, his jokes with the prosecutor did not help him, and the braggart did not get away with it. Barbara's last will was fulfilled, and Hugh Flynn received a real sentence. Now he would experience prison life and learn the cost of his misdeed. In fact, it was not only Barbara who suffered and died because of him, but also Thomas's brother. He wanted to save his wife so much that he fell asleep at the wheel. If it weren't for this whole story, the family would have lived peacefully and raised Lee. 3 months have passed, and the family was living together. The children got along and were friends. However, one day, while the grandmother wasn't watching, 2 young scouts decided that they were already old enough to walk home from school alone. They didn't wait for the grandmother and, deceiving the teacher, left on their own. On the way, they decided to feed the ducks at the pond in the park themselves. They had bread in their backpacks. Jenny got so carried away that she approached the edge too closely. The ground crumbled and she tumbled into the water. It was October outside and the water was cold. The girl couldn't swim, panicked and started to drown. Lee threw off his backpack, tore off his jacket, and with a cry of, "Hang on, little sister," rushed into the water. Unlike his sister, the boy could swim well, and by the time people gathered, he had managed to pull Jenny to shore. Passers-by called an ambulance, and the children were taken to hospital. "I'm going to give them a good scolding, both of them," Thomas was swearing on the way. How could they deceive the teacher like that? Leave on their own, scare you and me like that? Madeline just moaned and held onto her heart. "Oh, Tommy, don't be too hard on them. Who didn't misbehave in their childhood? Just a little scolding for prevention." Jenny was sitting with Lee in the hospital pyjamas, and they were whispering about something. Seeing her father's menacing face, Jenny jumped up bravely. "Daddy, don't scold Lee. It was all my fault, so punish me." But then Lee burst out from behind her back and started gibbering. "Uncle Thomas, I am a man, so I am to blame. It was my stupid idea to go to the pond. She had nothing to do with it. Forgive us. We were so scared ourselves." Jenny continued, not letting him get a word in. "You know, Daddy, Lee saved me. I was screaming and drowning and he dragged me to the shore, didn't let me die, so now he's definitely my real brother." Thomas's heart warmed up as he saw how friendly the children had become and how much they loved each other. He changed his mind about scolding them and instead sat on the bed, putting them both on their knees. "Oh my God, Granny and I were so worried about you. You're my silly children. Promise me you'll never do this again. And apologize to your teacher. She'll be furious with you. Remember, lying is not good. You should listen to adults. And Lee, well done. A real hero. You didn't hesitate, jumped into the cold water and saved your sister. But next time, it's better to call adults. A pleasant, middle-aged female doctor entered the room, looked sternly through her glasses and said, "Ah, so the dad has finally shown up. Well, let's talk. Tell me, how did you lose track of the children?" Jenny and Lee immediately started chattering. "Dr. Livingston, don't scold Dad. It's not his fault. And Granny too. It's all our fault. Scold us." The woman involuntarily smiled. Such a close-knit family, everyone covering for each other. I've never seen anything like it. Thomas listened to the doctor but couldn't take his eyes off her. She was so charming and charismatic that he was immediately drawn to her. Although she tried to be strict, her eyes were kind and radiant, making it clear that she loved children. Dr. Livingston kept adjusting the lock of hair that was sticking out from under her medical cap and squinting. "And where is the children's mother?" she asked in the end. "Why didn't she come?" Thomas sighed. "I've been a widower for 7 years now. My wife died during childbirth, and I'm raising my daughter myself. And Lee is my nephew. He recently lost his own parents. Now I'm raising him too, and I want to adopt him. Don't think I'm irresponsible. Work takes up a lot of time, and their granny always comes to look after the children. The school is not far away. The kids are good. But today they decided to show off, and therefore they got into trouble. Are they really okay? The water in the pond is cold." Dr. Livingston looked at the man completely differently. An hour ago she was outraged. How could he let 7-year-old children go to the pond alone? And now she was admiring him. He was raising 2 children on his own. Not every woman is capable of that, let alone a man. Besides, Thomas also caught her eye. He was polite and intelligent. Mary Livingston had been divorced for a long time. God didn't give her children, and her husband kept reproaching her for it and drinking heavily. Suddenly, she suggested, "If you like, take the kids home as an exception. I've examined them and they're fine, and tomorrow I'll drop by to you on my way home and listen to their lungs one more time just in case." Thomas smiled broadly. He himself was hesitant to leave, but didn't know how to start a conversation. "So," he agreed with pleasure. "Thank you for your understanding, Dr. Livingston. We'll definitely be waiting for you tomorrow." The next day, Thomas cancelled all his appointments, didn't go to work, and spent the whole day in the kitchen. The children stayed home too. Dr. Livingston arrived close to 5 o'clock. Thomas greeted her with chatter and bustle. "Good afternoon, please come in. We just finished cooking some chicken stew. Would you like to have lunch with us? You look so beautiful." Dr. Livingston blushed, as no one had complimented her in years. "Thank you. I won't refuse. I've been on my feet all day and haven't even had a poppy seed in my mouth. Well, where are my patients? I'll go examine them." Jenny and Lee were happy to see the doctor. They immediately liked this pleasant, smiling woman. She exuded calmness and kindness. Everything was fine with the children. Everyone sat down to eat, and Mary enjoyed the delicious stew. "Thomas, you're outstanding. You raise your children, cook so well, and have a business. Are you a human?" Madeline smiled quietly. The children giggled and Thomas blushed. "Unfortunately, despite all my achievements, we still lack a lady of the house and a mother to the children," he replied, and after a second added, "Mary, would you like to take a walk in the park on the weekend? We already have a tradition of walking there, feeding the ducks in the pond, and the children roller skate. Or are you busy?" Mary's heart was ready to jump out of her chest, and she answered too quickly. "You know, I think I'll agree. I haven't walked around for ages. It's all work and home. I'll be happy to join you. Are you okay if I bring my dog? His name is Baron. He's a poodle. Otherwise he'll be lonely at home." The children happily shouted, "Of course, bring Baron. Does he know any commands? We'll play ball then." The guest left, and Jenny suddenly said, looking slyly at her father, "Daddy, you should take a closer look at Dr. Livingston. She doesn't have a ring on her finger." Everyone laughed together, and Thomas thought, why not? After all, what if it's fate? "Well, Mr. McVitie, shall we give you a fashionable haircut today?" Jenny cheerfully asked her client, looking in the mirror. She didn't mind that the elderly man used to come to the hair salon just to chat. He didn't really need a haircut. Jenny was his only friend, and he dropped by the salon to exchange a couple of phrases with her. The young woman was always friendly and never refused the elderly man a cup of tea. Jenny could keep up any conversation and was also very attractive. "Mr. McVitie, you really like our Jenny," joked the other hairdressers. "Maybe you should propose to her, because she's been a bride too long." "I would if I were 40 years younger. Jenny is a good girl, but it's too late for me to think about marriage now," joked the elderly man. "But I want to introduce Jenny to my nephew. She's shy, but he's a perfect guy, I swear." "Why can't he find a wife for himself?" the other women teased him. "Maybe he's ugly or disabled." "No, he's healthy. Robert is a good guy and not crooked at all. He's got enough health for 3 people. He works as a firefighter. He's brave in everything, except when it comes to women. As soon as he sees a girl, he loses his tongue and can't say 2 words. But you like it when men approach you with beautiful speeches, don't you?" "That's right, Mr. McVitie," Jenny smiled. "We girls become stupid like that when some ladies' man pours honey in our ears." "Maybe your Robert is a good guy, but forgive me, I don't want to meet him. I'm not ready to find my own destiny by such way. I want to find my prince by myself and fall in love at first sight. And maybe I'll regret it later. But I really want to have at least one passionate romance in my life. With flowers, courtship, restaurants, tender words, many, many beautiful words, so that I can remember it in old age, even if it turns out to be a lie." "You're a fool, women," the elderly man coughed. "You go after some talkative loafer who doesn't even answer you properly, and the good, serious guys are left out." Mr. McVitie, grunting, got up from the chair, looked at his reflection, which had become younger after the haircut, and turned to Jenny. "You have golden hands, daughter. Thank you." "Well, if you don't want to meet my relative, that's your right. But I wouldn't mind having such a relative. But anyway, I'll go now," said Mr. McVitie, and left the hair salon. "Well, I have to go too." Jenny hurried. "I have an important meeting today. Don't be mad, girls, but I'm leaving a little earlier and passing to you all my work." When Jenny disappeared behind the door, the remaining women in the salon immediately began to discuss her. "And why does everyone go to Jenny? What does she have that we don't? This old man, for example, he came the day before yesterday, saw that his beloved Jenny wasn't there and left. Literally, every other client is hers," complained Heather, a tall, angular woman in her 40s. "That's true. How can we get Jenny out of the salon? Our profits would double." Angela nodded. "I've been working at the salon for 5 years since Jenny arrived. Half of my clients flock to her. She cuts hair better, you know." "No way. She cuts hair normally. She's just young and pretty. The men just switch over to her." "Angela, maybe you should be more gentle with them. Maybe then they wouldn't switch over as much," giggled Heather. "Besides, you seem more like a hairdresser from a poor neighborhood. You smoke too much, and you always mutter something under your breath. Listen, I wouldn't even sit in your chair." "Oh, come on, Heather. Did you graduate from the college for noble girls or something?" While the 2 envious women talked about Jenny, the girl was hurrying to her date. She had recently met a man who unexpectedly caught her eye from the very first moment they met. Stephen made an impression as a serious and responsible person, but he wasn't a bore. He knew how to court a woman and showered Jenny with compliments. She liked that he was passionate about his work, but always made time for her. Handsome, well-groomed, in a nice car, with a nice job and income. That's precisely how Jenny imagined the man of her dreams. They had only been seeing each other for a few weeks, but the girl was already ready to follow her prince to the ends of the earth. Mr. McVitie is so funny, Jenny thought about her conversation with the elderly man. He's always trying to set me up with his nephew. But really, how could he know that I'm not really listening to him? All I can think about is Stephen. I wonder where we'll go today. To a restaurant, or will he invite me to his house? The romance between Stephen and Jenny developed quickly. It seemed like they were head over heels in love with each other and couldn't live without their other half. Stephen showered Jenny with gifts, luxurious bouquets, and eventually gave her the coveted box with the engagement ring adorned with a beautiful diamond. "Oh, girls," boasted Jenny to her co-workers at the hair salon the next day, "it seems like I'm getting married. My Stephen proposed to me." The naive girl couldn't understand that her joy and happiness annoyed her jealous colleagues. Excitedly chattering, she told them about the upcoming wedding and as proof showed everyone the ring with the precious stone. "Well, why is this fool so lucky?" Heather and Angela whispered maliciously. "Now she's even grabbed herself a rich man. She must be a witch, no doubt." "Well, maybe now she'll leave the salon and we'll get her clients." "That's right, and this rich guy will soon leave her. All these rich guys are the same. They use young bodies and find themselves a new beauty." But Jenny didn't have time for gossip. She didn't listen to anyone, and she literally flew, elated with her happiness. Finally, a bright streak had come into her life after everything had gone wrong for so long that she had even stopped waiting for someone to turn on the light at the end of this endless dark tunnel. She always lived a very simple and even poor life. Her father left the family when she was only 3 years old, and her mother raised her alone. They lived in tiny apartments in densely populated, high-rise buildings. When Jenny turned 16, she finished hairdressing courses and started working. All the money she earned in the first few months went towards renting an apartment in a better neighborhood. Although this housing was not very much different from their old apartment, for all 16 years of her life, Jenny understood for the first time what it was like to live in a not-so-crowded building. Nobody hovered over her, and they didn't have arguments in the middle of the night right behind the wall. Jenny thought that now everything would work out for her and her mother. But it was not to be. Jenny's mother became ill. At first, they didn't pay any attention to her frequent indispositions, but after 6 months, doctors diagnosed her with a terrible disease, cancer, and everything went downhill again. Now Jenny worked like crazy, trying to earn something for her mother's treatment, but all to no avail. Her mother died a year later, leaving the girl completely alone. Her beloved work saved Jenny from loneliness. Jenny loved cutting people's hair. She did it with love and great enthusiasm. People felt it and always went to her with pleasure. At work, Jenny was distracted and forgot about her troubles, at least for a while. No one among outsiders could suspect that the smiling, friendly girl was sorrowful and unhappy inside. Until she met Stephen, Jenny's relationships with men somehow didn't work out. She constantly met either lazybones who did not know or did not want to provide for themselves, preferring to hang on to their parents, or guys who wanted to dominate and subjugate the freedom-loving Jenny. One of the last suitors even admitted that he had beaten his partners more than once if they couldn't please him in something. Jenny didn't wait for her turn and stopped all relations with him. But when she was almost totally disappointed in men, Stephen appeared on the horizon, the man of her dreams, a knight on a white horse, or rather, a white Mercedes. And now he had proposed to her. Happy Jenny said goodbye to her tiny apartment and moved in with her fiancé. She got to know Stephen's parents and even found a common language with his mother. "Jenny, you know I'm a doctor. I think it would be a good idea for both of you to undergo a medical examination before the wedding. You are future family, and I think there are children in your plans. So, to consciously approach the issue of having children, you need to be examined immediately to know all the pitfalls in case anything happens." Jenny was a little scared by the pressure from her future mother-in-law, but Stephen just laughed. "Jenny, my mum has her own quirks, like any other person. This is one of the most harmless, I'll tell you. It's not a bad idea to undergo an examination, to be honest, and my mum will help us with this. She has plenty of acquaintances at the clinic. They will arrange something for us at the highest level." Jenny didn't want to argue with her future in-laws, especially since she understood that her mother-in-law was right in some way. "Well, kids, you're perfectly healthy, and as a mother and a doctor, I can give you my blessing," said her mother-in-law with a smile after a while. Jenny tried to smile back at her, even though she didn't trust the cunning woman very much. The wedding was only a week away, and the bride's thoughts were occupied with preparing for the upcoming celebration. Later that evening, Stephen was taking a shower after a long, stressful day at work, while Jenny lay in bed, scrolling through social media pages. Suddenly, Stephen's phone vibrated. Jenny accidentally glanced at the screen and saw the number and photo of a girl. Something sharp and cold pierced her heart. After hesitating for a split second, she took Stephen's phone in her hands and opened the message. "My love, I miss you. I long for your touch. I want to snuggle up to your hot body." The letters blurred before her eyes. Her hand began to tremble treacherously, and Jenny dropped the phone on the blanket. Her brain refused to understand the words she had just read. Jenny picked up the phone again and quickly looked through all the messages that had come to Stephen's phone. Who is she? Why is she writing such revealing things to my Stephen? Clearly he has something with her, or at least had. Jenny couldn't gather her thoughts. Everything she saw only spoke of one thing. Her fiancé was cheating on her with this stranger. "Oh, darling, it's heaven to take a shower after a hard day," Jenny heard behind her. She turned to the smiling fiancé, who had just come out of the shower, and tears flowed from her eyes against her will. "What happened?" Stephen froze in the doorway from surprise. Then he noticed his phone in Jenny's hands and fell silent abruptly. "What is this?" the girl asked quietly. "Who is this woman? Why are you writing such revealing things to each other? Why does she have a photo in your phone? Are you sleeping with her?" She expected Stephen to come up with 100 excuses and try to calm her down as quickly as possible, but the guy was silent, and the silence made everything even scarier. Jenny jumped out of bed, threw the phone in Stephen's face, grabbed the first thing she could find, and ran out of the apartment. She couldn't bear the betrayal. Not Stephen. Not him. There had been a lot of pain in her life, but she didn't expect it from him. It seemed to her that he loved her boundlessly, unconditionally, and that he would never betray her. And now her faith in him was trampled. "Mary, can I stay with you for the night?" she called her friend. "What happened? Why aren't you at home?" Mary asked, frightened. Jenny told her everything, and the enterprising friend decided that Jenny should not cry and grieve now, but urgently heal her sorrow at the nearest bar. She made up Jenny's crying face, dressed her up and dragged her to cheer up with alcoholic cocktails. "Never let that goat get you down. That's all they want, to bring us to tears. Take my Henrik, for example. From the outside, everyone thinks he's such a quiet guy, but do you know how many times he's driven me crazy? If it weren't for the wine, I'd probably have gone crazy with him by now." Jenny followed her friend into the bar, nodding along, but not understanding how a couple of cocktails would help her. But a few hours later, she was joyfully singing karaoke with Mary, stumbling and giggling loudly in response to the jokes of the tipsy men who immediately started to join them. Some of them were extremely persistent, and Mary even started arguing with one of them. "I smeared all my makeup because of this drunk idiot," Mary said to Jenny. "I'm going to the restroom to fix myself up. Are you with me?" Mary was looking at Jenny questioningly, but the girl was completely drunk and just shook her head negatively. As soon as Mary left, a drunk guy approached Jenny and started hitting on her, quite rudely. "Dude, leave the girl alone. Can't you see she's not up to it?" said a tall, broad-shouldered man who looked about 5 years older than Jenny. He suddenly appeared next to the rude man. "Miss, can I escort you home? I think you've had enough fun. A little more alcohol and you'll feel even worse." The stranger carefully lifted Jenny and led her outside for some fresh air. "Let me call you a taxi. You just tell me the address before you fall asleep," the man offered. Jenny opened her mouth to give Mary's address, but when she looked at the stranger, she changed her mind. She didn't want to let him go. The man was like a magnet for her. His broad shoulders and strong arms held her so securely, and his voice was so calming that Jenny decided to stay with him tonight. "Take me to your place, please. I have nowhere to go tonight," she gathered the courage to say. She wanted to hug him and forget, even for a moment, about the humiliation she had to endure today. "I'll get even with Stephen. I'll pay him back in the same coin," thought her foggy brain. Jenny put her hands around the man's neck and kissed his lips greedily. For a split second, she felt some resistance, but then the man seemed to give in and responded with a hot kiss. The next morning, Jenny woke up in a stranger's apartment. Yesterday's stranger was sleeping next to her. "What have I done?" she thought in horror, and began to gather her things as quickly as possible. "I need to run away before he wakes up." The man was sleeping soundly, and if she were completely honest with herself, she really liked him. She felt so good with him last night, like never. If they had met under different circumstances, they might have had a beautiful romance. But now, what was he going to think of her? A frivolous girl who spends her evenings in bars and her nights with the first stranger she meets. Jenny was burning with shame. The only thing that calmed her down was the fact that she and the man were not acquainted, so nobody would find out about that night. However, she would have to explain herself to Mary. She purposely didn't take her phone to the bar so as not to hear phone calls from Stephen and not to listen to his fake story. It was not easy to speak with Mary. The poor girl was very anxious when she didn't find Jenny in the bar. After questioning those present, she found out that Jenny had left with a man in a taxi. She was about to report her friend missing to the police when Jenny appeared at her doorstep. There were indeed about a dozen calls from Stephen, and several SMSs on Jenny's phone. In them, he assured her that Megan was his ex-girlfriend, that she knew he had a fiancée, but continued to text him, and he could not dare to offend her and block her number. But now he finally did it. Jenny was desperate. Stephen was not guilty of anything, but she had behaved so stupidly right before the wedding. After a couple of weeks, during the honeymoon, Jenny felt slight dizziness and nausea. Tests confirmed that she was pregnant. Could it be the result of that one night? But no, it can't be. After all, she was with Stephen more often, and the likelihood that it was his child is immeasurably more significant. Jenny tried to calm herself down and forget about that night, like a dream that should dissipate upon awakening, leaving a light haze of regret for something that did not come true. But she never imagined to forget that night. On time, she gave birth to 2 boys and heard from the doctor what she had been afraid of all that time. The miracle did not happen. Her twins turned out to have the B blood type, while she and her husband had O. Under no circumstances could Stephen be their biological father. There was no point in hiding the truth, especially since Jenny's mother-in-law was a doctor, and sooner or later everything would have been revealed. Jenny understood that it would be incredibly difficult for her to handle 2 children at once, but she decided to tell the whole truth right away. And this woman kept throwing tantrums at me about Megan. Stephen was indignant, without even thinking that I would take you with your brats. Go back to their father. Jenny was picked up from the maternity hospital by her friend. 4 months had passed, 2 of the hardest months in Jenny's life. The babies got a little stronger in that time, and she made a difficult decision for herself. After placing them in daycare, she returned to work, bringing joy to her clients and disappointment to her colleagues. One of the first people to greet her was Mr. McVitie. "Jenny, how I missed you. How are your kids? How are you, my dear? I'm certainly happy to see you, but why did you go back to work so early?" "Well, there's not much to tell, Mr. McVitie. Good things are scarce. I split up with my husband." "What are you saying? How could this happen? What a scoundrel he turned out to be." No, he's not to blame for anything. It just happened. In general, this story is not interesting to anyone for long, but thank God my little ones are alive and healthy." "Well, that's the most important thing, Jenny, that the children are healthy and growing up without getting sick. It's hard for you, I understand. It's good they enrolled them in daycare." "Yes, of course, it would have been better later, but there was no other way. I'm alone." "Well, that's fixable. You'll find a good person, believe me. And you're not alone. You have so many grateful clients. You're like family to us. Here's what I propose. I'll organise a fan club for Jenny, the hairdresser, and her sons." "Am I a movie star to you, Mr. McVitie?" Jenny laughed, probably for the first time in many, many days. For some reason, these words of the old man made her feel light-hearted. How is a mother of twins not a star? She'll shine brighter than any star. "That's it, we've decided. We won't leave you alone. When's your day off? Give me your address. My nephew and I will come to visit, pick you up with the little ones, and we'll go on vacation. Come visit us this Sunday. Robert, my nephew, will make a barbecue. We'll eat, chat, and maybe even go to the countryside. Do you know what kind of car Robert has? A Jeep. Your whole big family will fit in it." "Mr. McVitie, are you at it again? Why are you deciding everything for your Robert? Does the young man really need to spend his day off entertaining us?" "I'm not trying to match you up with him. I'm just inviting you over. I'm a great cook myself. All right, we'll be there for you at 10 on Sunday. The verdict is final. No appeal. Oh, if only I could shed 40 years, said Mr. McVitie, and ran off to his business. The entire hairdresser burst out laughing. What an old man! Look, Jenny, if his nephew takes after him, don't let him go. But where am I supposed to go now with my kids? Jenny waved her hand. However, Jenny put on her best dress on Sunday morning and dressed her little ones in cute outfits. Just in time, the doorbell rang. Jenny hurried to open the door and almost fainted. Next to Mr. McVitie was the man from her dreams, the man with whom she had spent that magical, sweet night that gave her sons. "Is it you?" Jenny and Robert said this short phrase at the same time. "I don't understand anything. So you know each other?" Mr. McVitie was surprised. "Well, it turns out that we have already met," muttered Robert. Jenny began to tremble with a small, nervous shake. It was impossible to believe, but the father of her children was the nephew that Mr. McVitie had long dreamed of introducing to Jenny. And it was happiness for everyone. Now her boys would not grow up without a father, and their young mother would not bite her tear-stained pillow at night. After all this, who can deny destiny? Little Alberta's childhood couldn't be called carefree. She lived in a mountain village. Every day she descended into the valley where her school was located, and she, like many other children who came from afar, had to return home carrying heavy loads like a pack animal. Every day after school, Alberta went to a small shop where she bought everything necessary for her family and for her elderly neighbour. And when she returned home, the old Mr. Underwood would greet her warmly from afar, noticing the thin figure of the fragile girl carrying her school bag and full shopping bag. "Thank you, my dear, for helping an old man. I can no longer walk such a path on my own. My legs are completely sore," the old Mr. Underwood used to say. "You are a real ray of light in your mother's joyless life, and to me, an old man, you are the first helper. May God bless you, girl." Despite her difficult life, Alberta truly brought joy to everyone who knew her. She loved to sing. Everyone who had heard her gentle voice assured Elizabeth, the girl's mother, that her daughter had a bright future. But Elizabeth often cried, looking at the skinny girl who had to shoulder an impossible burden from a young age. She blamed herself for not being able to give her a carefree and wealthy life. "If it weren't for my husband's death, I wouldn't have been sick so often. My health has been bad in recent years, and I'm ashamed that my daughter has to take care of me." Elizabeth blamed herself. If she were born into a rich family, maybe she would have married a rich man and lived in wealth and prosperity. When Alberta turned 18, she decided to move to the capital. "Mum, you need treatment. I heard that people in big cities can cure almost all diseases. I'll earn money, take you to the city, and definitely get you back on your feet. Meanwhile, Mr. Underwood will look after you, and Aunt Megan's children have grown up, and I'll ask them to buy groceries for you. They are quick kids and will help you with the household chores if needed." The whole village gathered to bid farewell to the lovely girl and wish her a safe journey. Everyone was sure that the hard-working and honest mountain beauty would surely find a good job in the capital, and the neighbours promised to look after her mother. Unfortunately, the big city did not welcome Alberta as warmly as she had hoped. She was a stranger to all these people rushing about their business. She was frightened by the huge flows of cars, spacious squares and avenues. She got lost in the numerous alleys and didn't quite understand whom to turn to for help. Her first attempts to find a job ended in failure. At first, she worked at the market, where she had to carry heavy boxes of vegetables herself, endure rudeness and insults from the loaders, who instead of helping her, kept slacking off. As the cold weather set in, the girl got a job as a salesgirl in a shop. They immediately started hanging all the shortages in the cash register on the new girl, and after a month of work, Alberta not only couldn't get the money she earned, but she also owed a tidy sum to the store owner. The next place she worked was a small cafe. At first, everything was fine, and customers liked the attentive and sweet girl. It seemed that Alberta would finally be able to adapt to the city life in some way. But soon, the owner of the cafe returned from a trip abroad, and at the first meeting, he hinted to the girl that he would only allow her to continue working if she was favourable towards him. Alberta was a clean and decent girl, and the bulky, mature man did not evoke any romantic feelings in her. Unable to withstand his persistent advances, she eventually quit, engulfed by fear and desperation. She was ashamed and embarrassed in front of her neighbours, who believed in her, and in front of her mother, who gave her her last savings to settle in the big city. And now, after several months later, Alberta realised that she could not please her mother with anything, and bitterly cried, sitting on a bench in the park. "Well, why are you making such a damp place here?" someone asked her, and Alberta raised her tear-stained face and saw an elderly man next to her. He compassionately looked at her and seemed ready to help. "Did someone offend you?" The stranger tried to start a conversation. "My name is Mr. Halston, and what's your name?" "Alberta," the girl said timidly. The old man raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Alberta? Rare name. You must not be from here." "No, not from here. I came from afar to earn money for my mother's treatment, but nothing works out for me," the girl complained to a stranger. For the first time in a while, having at least some opportunity to speak out, she told him all about her misfortunes. "You're despairing too early, my dear. Listen to what I have to tell you. I work as a gardener in a wealthy house. The owner has 5 children and is looking for a hard-working, decent woman to help with the housework. His wife spends more and more time in beauty salons and shops, and my boss, Mr. Gilbert, works a lot. He is from a simple background himself, so he is understanding and kind to people, and he loves his children very much and spends all his spare time with them. Let's try to find a place for you there." Alberta listened to the old man and decided to take a risk for the last time. The house where her new acquaintance led her was indeed large. From the first glance, it was evident that many things were done there specifically for children. "Mr. Gilbert built this house before the birth of the babies, immediately planning to make it comfortable for children. That's why half of his garden is taken up by various children's slides and swings. Sometimes I even grumble a little, because I'm supposed to be a gardener, but more often I repair swings. And in the house there's a whole entertainment centre for kids. Don't be surprised that all 5 children are the same age. And don't ask him any questions. It's none of our business how that family live." So, did his wife give birth to all 5 at once? "No, she didn't give birth to anyone. She doesn't want to ruin her figure. I'll tell you a secret, but don't gossip. Keep quiet. There is a dark story here. The wife apparently refused to give birth, but Mr. Gilbert wanted a large family. So he turned to surrogate mothers and hired 2 women at once so he could have 2 at once. But they gave birth to 5 for him. One gave birth to twins and the other to triplets. And now he has his own hockey team, we could say. 3 sons and 2 daughters, and he's their goalkeeper." As Alberta listened in surprise to Mr. Halston's story and looked around, a group of happy children ran out of the house, like little sparrows just leaving the nest, chirping and running back and forth. The nanny came out after them. "Mrs. Lansbury," called the gardener to the woman. The nanny hurried over to them, separating the quarrelling boys as she went. "Mrs. Lansbury, meet Alberta. She's a decent, honest girl who needs work and a place to live. I wonder if Mr. Gilbert will agree to take her. What do you think?" "Mr. Gilbert left this morning and won't be back until tomorrow." "He'll see then. But today you can stay in my room if you have nowhere else to go," offered the nanny. Alberta gratefully agreed and immediately got to know the children. She noticed right away that the children, especially the girls, were really missing their mother. Kate and Lizzie were initially very shy, but they soon opened up to Alberta and started sharing stories from their childhood. The boys, although they tried to act grown up, were still playful and soon swarmed around Alberta from all sides, like ants gathering around a piece of sugar. "Just look at them," Mr. Horston laughed. "You clearly won them over. Of course, you're not much older than they are." "Dad, Dad!" the children shouted the next morning when their father returned home from his trip. "We have a guest. Her name is so beautiful. Alberta. She's really nice. Can we keep her here?" they screamed. Robert Gilbert took the girls' hiring very seriously. He examined her documents and medical records and asked her many questions about her family, her hometown, and her mother, who still lived in a distant village. "It's good that you're willing to work and have a motive, but will you have enough strength for 5 children? Mrs. Lansbury will need to leave soon, and all 5 of these wild kids will fall on you. Think it over 100 times before you agree. As for me, I'm ready to give you a job." But Alberta agreed without hesitation. She really liked the children. They were so lively and sincere, and she felt like they needed her. The girl hadn't seen the house owner yet, but she already understood that the woman was not at all concerned with the children. Susan returned home only a week later. During all that time, she was resting with a friend somewhere in Spain. Susan didn't even approach the children. Her gaze slid over them indifferently, like over furniture. And Alberta didn't arouse any special interest in her either. Some girl from a mountain village couldn't be interesting for a wealthy socialite. "Mr. Halston?" asked Alberta to the old man. "But how did it happen? Mr. Gilbert is such a kind and responsive person. He loves children, but his wife is entirely different. How do they live together?" "Dear, you should not involve yourself in the owner's business. But I wouldn't say they are very close. I have been working here for so long, and they always lived like neighbours. He takes care of the business, house, and children, while she only takes care of herself. Maybe he was in love with her once, got married, and now they just live together. It happens." Alberta sighed, feeling sorry for Mr. Gilbert and the little ones, who received neither love nor affection from the cold, arrogant woman. But no matter how the situation was at the owner's family, Alberta was doing very well. The boss paid her regularly, and now she could send money to her mother regularly. After 6 months of observing Alberta and her work, Mr. Gilbert offered to bring her mother over so that doctors could examine her and make the right diagnosis. Alberta was thrilled. Her dream was about to come true. And soon her beloved mother was really by her side, and after the doctor's examination and treatment, she was feeling much better. Alberta's life finally had a white streak. A good job, kind and nice people around her. Alberta was grateful to the Almighty for granting her such prosperity, tranquility. That was all she wanted. And then something happened that no one expected. Mr. Gilbert disappeared unexpectedly. His car was found in the river. Apparently, he had an accident and flew off the bridge at full speed. His body couldn't be found, and everyone assumed he drowned. everything changed completely. The joy left the house. The children sat in their room, huddled in a small, constantly crying bundle. Without their dad, they became orphans instantly. Alberta and Mr. Halston knew that Susan didn't need them, but neither the old man nor the girl could imagine that Robert's wife would decide to send the children to an orphanage. "Mr. Halston, we can't allow this to happen," Alberta cried. "How can we let her take away their home, even if she doesn't love them? And Mr. Gilbert might still be found." She decided to talk to Susan, but she was categorical. "I don't care what happens to these children. They were never mine, and their arrival in this house ruined our entire life with Robert. It was his obsession with a big family. I could never understand why he needed it. If you like, take them to yourself. I don't care if they live with you or in an orphanage." "I'm sorry, Susan, it's not my business, but would you still allow the children to stay in the house, at least for their father's sake? You loved him once." "Have you lost your mind? Don't push your luck. Otherwise you'll be kicked out of here and you won't even have time to pack your things. I am now the mistress of this house, and I repeat, for the last time, I don't need children here." With trembling hands, feeling like a thief, Alberta collected the children's belongings in large bags. The children pressed against her and looked at her with frightened eyes. "Don't be afraid," the girl said confidently, although she was scared to death. "Now I will be your mother and won't let anyone hurt you." "Where are we going?" asked Tommy with a trembling voice. He was the bravest of the boys, while Ben and James were sniffling and swallowing their tears. "Mr. Halston will shelter us for now. My mother already lives with him. I'll introduce you to her. She's very kind and can make delicious flatbread with goat cheese. You'll definitely like her. We'll all be pleased together, you'll see." Alberta tried to convince the children, but inside she was gripped with fear. Hard times had fallen on everyone. Mr. Halston and Alberta had gone to work for new employers to feed the 5 children. Elizabeth looked after the children and did everything she could to make sure the orphaned children didn't get too sad and cried less often. The operation on her thyroid gland, which was paid by Mr. Gilbert when he was alive, allowed Elizabeth to get back on her feet in time, and now she was happy to be able to help the daughter and 5 children of her missing benefactor. But the world is not without good people, and Alberta encountered them no less often than bad and evil people. So when she tried to obtain guardianship over the children, indifferent and heartless people wanted to take the children away and send them to an orphanage. And at this time, Mr. Halston's nephew, Gordon, appeared in their lives. He held a high post in the police force, had many acquaintances in the guardianship authorities and in other social services. Learning their story, he began to think about how to help Alberta. Meanwhile, one day, Alberta sang at one of the festivals in the park. The owner of a food truck on the food court was struck by her voice and offered Alberta a job as a singer in his restaurant. The girl started to sing there in the evenings, and therefore she could take care of the children during the day. The owner paid the girl well and supplied her family with food. By the way, he wasn't at a loss for it, because he had more visitors to his place. Now many came not only to eat delicious food, but also to listen to Alberta's singing. Having learned her story, people tried to help her in any way they could. Thanks to kind people and Gordon's connections, the children were able to stay with her, and although not very wealthy, they lived happily with their foster mother Alberta and Elizabeth and Mr. Halston as their grandparents. The only thing missing for their complete happiness was a clear understanding of what had happened to Robert Gilbert. In their hearts, they held on to hope that the situation with his disappearance would become clearer. After all, no one had seen him dead. Susan, trying to take possession of her husband's property, did everything possible to have him declared dead as soon as possible. The money available to her only lasted for a short while, and she began to have serious problems. It turns out that the woman had debts and, in addition, a lover. Darryl was a gambler and a junkie who only needed Christine as long as he could get money out of her. It was with him, under the guise of a girlfriend, that she travelled around Europe, and he was the one she gave first her personal money and then her expensive jewellery and fur coats so that he could pay off his creditors. Spoiled by her husband, Susan only now realised what a treasure her husband Robert was. He never denied her anything and did not burden her with any obligations. She never even thought that not all men are as noble and generous as him. Meanwhile, Mr. Gilbert's disappearance, his wife's strange acquaintances, made the investigation take a closer look at Susan. Despite her passionate desire to end it all as soon as possible, Robert's accounts were frozen and his search continued. From time to time, Mr. Halston's nephew visited the elderly man and his unusual family. He told them what he had learned. It turned out that the latest quarrel between Darryl and Susan ended terribly for her. The gambler, who had lost everything, demanded money from his mistress and beat her to near death. Susan's neighbours, outraged by the indecent swearing, shouting and noise from her house, called the police. And if the police hadn't appeared in time, Darryl would have beaten her to death in a fit of rage. With a broken jaw and numerous bruises, Susan ended up in the trauma department, and her lover was arrested for causing her serious injuries. However, after recovering a little and losing several front teeth, Susan was forced to go not to a capital dentist but to a courtroom, and not as a victim of her lover's fists, but as his accomplice in a much more serious crime. No one expected such a turn of events. Alberta, who had learned that Susan was in the hospital, had already thought of visiting her when completely unexpected circumstances arose, which made her hair stand on end. It was Mr. Gilbert's wife who had organised the accident for her husband. Her accomplice gave such testimony when he, being in custody, began to have a terrible craving and was ready to do anything just to get a dose. So, what happened to Robert after all? Darryl's confession shed no light on his fate. Nevertheless, one day, Robert himself appeared on the doorstep of Mr. Halston's house, accompanied by Gordon. At first, everyone who saw him was shocked. It was difficult to recognise the once thriving businessman in this exhausted, thickly bearded, greying man, and only his blue eyes in the rays of early kind wrinkles betrayed in him the same Robert whom all his household members were anxious about. After all, he was truly dear to each of them, to old Mr. Halston, to a son, to Elizabeth as a benefactor who had put her on his feet, to the children as the most wonderful and kind father. And what about Alberta? He was dear to the girl as a beloved man, but she was afraid to admit it even to herself. In the evening, when all passions had subsided and the family had put happy little ones to bed, Robert began his story. His story was so wonderful that only those who knew this extraordinary person and understood that the Lord had spared his life for those who loved him could believe in his miraculous salvation. When his car fell off the bridge due to damaged brakes and went underwater, he miraculously managed to escape and get to shore without difficulty. However, he didn't remember anything that happened to him. Head injuries affected his brain activity. For over a year, he was homeless, surviving on odd jobs, without any identification and not knowing anything about himself. A week ago, he was beaten up by a drunkard who tried to steal a few $100s he had earned through hard work. Robert was picked up on the waterfront by an elderly, retired military man who jogged there every morning. He took him to the hospital, and there Robert regained consciousness and realized that his memory had returned. He asked the doctor to inform the nearest police station about him. That's how they met Mr. Halston's nephew. It was now Gordon's turn to tell Robert what had happened after his disappearance. The man had no words to express his gratitude to all kind people for their help, and he was not ashamed of his grateful tears. Nevertheless, Robert admitted that all the misfortunes they had endured were worth it for his children to finally have a real mother in Alberta. It seemed as if God himself had taken this kind girl by the hand and brought her to his house from a distant mountain village. Of course, there was no doubt that they would all continue to live together in Robert's big house. At first, Alberta was a foster mother, and then she became Robert's beloved wife. Yes, it had to happen, and it did. Less than a year passed before Robert asked Elizabeth for her daughter's hand in marriage. In fact, he had fallen in love with the girl from the very first day she appeared in his house. But back then, he tried not to show his feelings, as he was married, and besides, it wasn't in his rules. Now, having obtained a divorce from Susan, he was free. And finally, the big and rich house was not just a full cup. It was filled with children's laughter, love, mutual care, the smell of baking from Elizabeth, and flowers, carefully grown by Mr. Halston. Not long after that, to the delight of all its inhabitants, the house was filled with the gentle singing of Alberta at the cribs of two little girls. Twins she gave birth to her beloved husband on their first wedding anniversary. The older children were thrilled. They had just started their school holidays, and they were vying to help their mother, Alberta. The boys argued amongst themselves about who would stroll the stroller with the little girls along the garden paths. Kate and Lizzie urgently reviewed their girly outfits and dolls, which they were going to give their little sisters. The father of many children, crazed with happiness, was ready to carry his fragile wife in his arms, and she, laughing, refused and suggested that he should more often take his little daughters in his arms and not forget about the older children, who, though feeling grown up, still needed warmth and love. However, there was no shortage of love in their large family, which had suffered so much for its happiness, and when someone among their friends teased Robert, hinting that he had supposedly become a hen-pecked husband to his fragile young wife Alberta, and asked who was in charge in his house, Robert invariably answered sincerely, "Love is the most important thing in our house."
A truck was driving along a deserted highway, like a huge ship, illuminating the road with its headlight. Pleasant music was playing in the cabin. The driver was in high spirits and humming the melody to himself. The long, tiring, but profitable trip was coming to an end. Jason was on his way home. He really liked his job as a long-distance truck driver. New cities, roads, people, impressions. The only drawback was the impossibility of long-term relationships with girls. Few wanted to link their lives with a man who was always away from home. This, of course, saddened the guy a little because he was already 27 years old, and of course, he wanted to start a family and have children. Well, not a big deal, Jason thought. I'll work for another 5 years, save up some money, and then open my own auto repair shop. And then a family will appear. Everything has its time. In the morning, Jason stopped to refuel and have a snack. He was just a short drive home, but he needed to rest. He went into a small cafe and sat down at a table. A waitress approached him to take his order, and he looked at her and involuntarily admired her. She looked like a princess from an Eastern fairy tale. Coal black eyes, eyebrows raised, delicate facial features, and thick black hair braided in braids. Jason introduced himself to the girl, and her name was Magda. He made her several compliments, left generous tips, and his phone number, and decided for himself that he would do everything to win her over. Magda, however, was not impressed by Jason at all. A regular guy in a dusty t-shirt and shorts, and a long-distance truck driver to boot? Not a particularly promising prospect. In her dreams, the girl saw an entirely different man. A handsome prince dressed in the latest fashion, driving a black Jeep. And she was there with him, like she stepped off the pages of fashion magazines. He opened the door for her, and they got to have lunch at an expensive restaurant. This beggarly existence had already bored her to death. This cafe, her life from paycheck to paycheck with her mother, life seemed to pass her by, and she wouldn't see anything. Therefore, Magda reacted very coolly to Jason's flirting, but she still took the phone, just in case. However, Jason turned out to be stubborn and persistent. He courted her for a long time, and beautifully gave her flowers, read poetry, promised that he would save up money and open a business. He was devoutly in love with Magda, and longed to hear the cherished words, "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you." And Magda had been thinking for a long time, hesitating, weighing everything, and finally agreed. But she had a wild argument with her mother. "Why do you need him? I know these long-distance truck drivers. They have a family and a child in every state. But what kind of nomadic life is that? Wake up, you're such a beauty. You will definitely find a better match." However, Magda only got angry with her mother. "Mom, do you know that I'm already 25 years old? By the way, and millionaires are not queuing up for me. I'll just waste my life alone. Jason is kind, decent, he loves me." The girl tried to prove her point. "He promised to open a business in a couple of years, and I believe him. He's not a drunkard, he's not lazy. This is my choice, Mom. Accept it and respect my decision." Elena eventually agreed. Of course, she didn't really believe in these stories about the business. She had lived in this world for many years and doubted Jason's promises. And Jason was over the moon. A grin to his ears didn't come off his face for a minute. The cafe was booked, the wedding date was set, and all that was left was to buy the rings and the bride's dress. Jason was on the last trip before the wedding and asked Magda to look for rings while he was away. The bride's mood was great from the morning. She carefully dressed up, got ready, and went to a jewelry store to look at rings. Upon entering, she felt like she had entered a fairy tale. Hundreds of various rings and earrings with stones sparkling invitingly from the display cases. However, after looking at the prices, the girl gasped once again. The amounts were simply outrageous. She felt so sad. Magda looked around the store for a salesman, but instead found a handsome man who seemed to have stepped out of her dreams. He was sophisticated, refined, polished, and it was immediately apparent that he was very well off. "Excuse me, can you please help me?" The trembling girl finally spoke up. "Why not help such a beautiful young lady? I'm listening to you." The man smiled and winked at the girl. "You know, I have a wedding in a week. I would like to pick out rings, but the problem is that our budget is somewhat limited." Magda stumbled and blushed sadly. "I understand you. I'll show you the appropriate options at a discount. And would you like to have a coffee and discuss everything? We'll have a sale soon," the man suggested and smiled meaningfully. Millions of butterflies fluttered in Magda's stomach. The man's name was Mario, and he and his mother had a network of jewelry stores throughout the city. Fortunately for Magda, he accidentally ended up behind the counter in this store. The saleswoman got sick, and he had to replace her. Mario gave Magda his business card, told her to call him anytime, and gifted her with a long, intriguing look. Magda thought about Mario all night. Thoughts of possible intimacy with him burned inside her. Everything inside her was torn apart and turned upside down. She never even felt a tenth of these emotions with Jason, and in the morning, the girl decided everything for herself. Such a chance comes once in a lifetime. Whatever happens, I'll call, she thought, and dialed the coveted number. Hello, Mario, it's Magda. My fiance is still away. Would you kindly take me to a country house to my friends outside the city? She asked. In reality, the girl went all in. Of course, there was no country house or friends. Instead, there was a passionate love affair right in the car at the forest glade. Mario turned out to be a stunning lover, and Magda never experienced such intense feelings at the peak of bliss before. A week passed like a moment. Magda and Mario were consumed by passionate love passions. The girl, of course, tormented her conscience. She feverishly thought about how to get out of the situation and what to do with Jason. And the wedding. How to tell him everything. But she knew for sure there would be no wedding. On the day of Jason's arrival, Magda had already taken all of her belongings from his apartment and couldn't think of anything better than leaving him a note. Jason, there will be no wedding. I met and fell in love with another man. Forgive me and try to understand. Upon coming home and learning the news, Jason was overcome with grief. He refused to believe in such treacherous betrayal. He tried to call Magda, pounded the doorsteps of her house, but she refused to get in touch and did not pick up the phone. One day, Jason was waiting for her outside of her workplace in the hopes of finally understanding why she had humiliated him. Suddenly, he saw Magda come out of the cafe and was about to approach her, but a luxurious car pulled up. Magda got in, passionately kissed her companion, and they drove off, laughing merrily. Jason silently got into his car and went home. A few days later, he embarked on a distant journey to the other end of the country. He hoped that the long road trip would help him forget and save him from the sadness and pain of a betrayed love. Meanwhile, Magda was living life to the fullest. She frequented expensive restaurants, yacht clubs, wore luxurious dresses, and indulged in a sea of passion. She felt like a queen. Finally, all my dreams have come true, she thought to herself more than once. Her mother was thrilled for her daughter. Thank God you came to your senses and left your poor Jason. I'm so happy for you, my dear. Mario will marry you, and you'll live your life like a queen, she exclaimed. But Mario's parents did not approve of the relationship and constantly reprimanded him. Mario, you're not 16 years old. You had your fun with that girl, and that's enough. Don't you even think about marrying that gold digger. You won't get a penny. I'll make sure of it, his father scolded him. Mario just waved it off. Oh, Dad, stop it. I'm not crazy enough to ruin my life because of some sentimental girl. I'll have some more fun. Calm down, he laughed. However, without asking anyone, fate took an unexpected sharp turn. One night, Magda and Mario were driving back from the club, kissing as usual, and got into a terrible accident. Magda woke up in the traumatology ward with her legs in traction, her arm in a cast, and her head throbbing with pain. The diagnosis? A broken hip. Mario suffered much less, only with a bruised rib and a small wound. He was stitched up and sent home to recover. But before Magda, difficult times had come. She needed a complicated operation and had spent a month in the hospital. She was still hoping that the door would open and her beloved Mario would come in, hugging her like a little girl and feel sorry for her. And most importantly, pay for her treatment. But instead, Mario's mother burst into the ward like a fury. You've gone too far. You almost killed my son. What if my son would have died? It's all because of you, the enraged woman scolded Magda. What are you speaking about? I love him. I'm going to marry him, Magda defended herself. Are you out of your mind? Who's going to marry you? Just stop fooling around. Who are you and who is he? Do you even understand? Mario's mother did not calm down. Magda cried out of offense and despair. Mario never picked up the phone, nor did he ever visit her. After a month, Jason returned from his trip and discovered what happened to Magda. Without hesitation, he rushed to the hospital. Upon entering the ward, he didn't accuse her of anything. Magda, how did it happen that you got in here? Do you need help? Magda felt terribly ashamed and lowered her eyes. Jason, I'm so sorry. Can you forgive me? Please help me. Jason began visiting her at the hospital and paid for her treatment. He visited her at home every day, brought her delicious hot food, and brewed rosehip tea in a thermos with love, hoping Magda would recover more quickly. His friends teased him. Are you crazy, Jason? She humiliated you, and you're bringing her pies? You'll regret it. Jason understood it intellectually, of course, but he couldn't shake the love he felt for Magda from his heart. When they were together, watching a movie or taking a walk in the autumn park, his heart sang with happiness. Thanks to Jason's care and attention, Magda recovered in 3 months. She felt good, calm, and safe with him. But every time she thought of the scoundrel Mario, a warm sensation spread in her lower abdomen, and her heart beat wildly. Jason had spent all of his savings on Magda's treatment, and with his money running out, he planned his next trip by truck. He couldn't shake off the feeling of inexplicable fear and anxiety, repeatedly asking Magda if she would betray him again or wait for him. And every time, Magda hugged him and whispered in his ear, "Don't doubt me, I won't betray you anymore. You've done so much for me." Finally, Jason left feeling relatively calm and believing in Magda. Although he was afraid she would leave him again, he still hoped she had changed and would spend her life with him. A few days after Jason's departure, Mario found Magda. He learned that she had recovered and immediately went to her house. Without giving her time to think, he slipped inside and pressed her against the wall with his whole body, whispering hotly in her ear, "I missed you so much, my sweet. And you? I hope you're not angry. I couldn't be with you because of my father's business, but now I'm here and I won't leave you anymore." Magda went with him again, overwhelmed by the insane passion and losing her head completely. They went to an expensive hotel where there was plenty of champagne, flowers, and intense emotions. They met again and again, but Mario didn't offer anything, didn't apologize, and Magda understood that he was using her. But as soon as he touched her, she no longer belonged to herself. Jason was returning home when his friend called him. Jason's heart unpleasantly squeezed in a bad premonition. "I don't want to upset you, my friend, but your Magda is cheating on you. She has no conscience. Yesterday, I saw her with her ex. They went to a hotel, laughing and happy. He was holding her waist and she was kissing him. I told you, Jason, to give up on this idea. She's not the one for you. Do you understand? She's a kept woman and a party girl. If you want to be mad at me, go ahead, but you're a complete fool, Jason. That's my opinion." Jason hung up the phone silently, turned off the engine, got out of his car, and fell onto the grass in the middle of the field. He cried, lying on the ground for a very long time. The only thought pulsating in his head was, why? After calming down, he called Magda. She was chirping on the phone, saying how much she missed him and waited for him. And when she asked him when he would be back, Jason was astonished by her treachery and audacity. He abruptly cut her off and said, "You're so ungrateful, you wretch. I know everything, and I hate you." Jason hung up in anger. As for Magda, she was a little upset that she got caught cheating, of course. She understood that Mario could leave her again, but Jason, the simpleton, would do anything she wanted. However, she didn't know how to make long-term plans. She was living at the moment, and today was good with Mario. What will happen tomorrow will happen tomorrow. What if Mario marries me? Who knows what the future holds? I am beautiful, and there are all the chances to become Mario's wife. I just have to please his parents, and that it is only a matter of time, thought Magda to herself. Meanwhile, after that bad conversation, Jason continued driving home from his trip. He calmed down a bit and tried to keep himself together. After all, the road is no joke, and nervousness could lead to accidents. When he was about 70 kilometers away from home, Jason noticed a woman on the side of the road. She was hitchhiking. The cars were flying by on the highway without noticing her or stopping. It was getting dark outside. The sky was cloudy and the storm was brewing. Jason felt sorry for the woman and decided to give her a ride, even though he usually never picked up hitchhikers. They started talking. The girl's name was Frances. She was on her way home from work and lived in the suburbs with her elderly father and 7-year-old son. She missed the last bus and her phone died. As luck would have it, Frances was worried that her father would be concerned if she didn't return by evening, and he had a weak heart, so who knows what could happen. Jason looked at the woman. She wasn't a beauty. She was simple and modest, a so-called gray mouse. But her open gaze and big sensual lips made her adorable. Sorry for the question, but that about the father of your child, Jason asked. Father? No, traitor. All men are the same. He professed his love, promised to marry me, and then he found himself a richer girl. When he found out I was pregnant, he came back and begged for forgiveness, saying he'd love me and our son, but instead, he cheated left and right. I don't trust anyone anymore. Frances burst out in emotions, and tears welled up in her eyes. A familiar story. I just found out about another betrayal recently, and this is after everything I've done for my girlfriend. Well, then let's be friends. We have something to talk about. We've both suffered, Frances said with a sad smile. Jason began to visit Frances frequently. He and her father immediately found common ground. Frances's 7-year-old son was thrilled with Jason and his huge car, always asking to ride with him. Jason helped the family with their household chores, repairing the porch and fixing the roof. Frances turned out to be an excellent homemaker, cooking delicious dishes and baking fragrant buns. Jason felt welcome here. They awaited his arrival, sent him off, and greeted him with love. Gradually, he became close with Frances, and they started to live as one big friendly family. A year later, they had a beautiful daughter named Holly. Jason decided to sell his apartment and open an auto repair shop to be close to his family. On his way to the notary to finalize the documents, he looked into the cafe where he once met Magda. With a nostalgic ache, he ordered coffee and sat down at a table. A cleaning lady was working between the tables. She was unkempt, with obvious signs of alcohol abuse on her face. Something about her seemed familiar to Jason, and he desperately tried to remember. Looking closer, he gasped. It's Magda! Oh my god, what happened to her? Jason was amazed, remembering how attractive she used to be. Unable to resist, the man called out to her, Magda, is that you? The woman looked dissatisfied, turned around, and her face distorted with anger and shame. It's me. Who else? She grumbled angrily and ran out of the cafe. After asking the waiter, Jason learned of her sad fate. Mario forced her to have an abortion, but it had bad consequences, and now she was permanently childless. Then he left her because his parents found him a suitable match from high society. Magda started to drink down her sorrow, went downhill, and ended up as a cleaning lady. But they hired her more out of pity. Jason was unpleasantly stunned because despite Magda's betrayal, he had never wished her such a fate. And now, he even felt a little sorry for her. But who's to blame for her fate? She chose it herself. She gave up a loving and faithful man for base animal instincts and money. A wave of love and gratitude towards Frances suddenly overwhelmed him. He approached her, hugged her gently, and said, Thank you for everything, my dear. You are my happiness. Only now did he realize that false declarations of love and Shakespearean passions were not so important in relationships. And you should not love a woman for her beauty. You should appreciate her loyalty, devotion, and decency.
Mrs. Dennings always paid more attention to Celia than to the others. No one knew why she showed such favoritism, but an elderly woman, wiping tears, knew that she saw her daughter in the girl. Her daughter had died with her husband in a car accident, and the woman had no children of her own, so she put all her efforts into raising the little orphans. Oh my God, she's so much like my Jenny, Mrs. Dennings thought, hugging the orphan girl. Celia felt the warmth emanating from her tutor and reached for her like a sunflower to the sun. Mrs. Dennings always tried to please the little girl with something tasty or buy her something new. The girl considered her teacher her guardian angel and foster mother in one. Thanks to Mrs. Dennings, Celia was able to find a job when she left the orphanage 6 months ago. The manager at the cafe was the sister of her beloved teacher, who happily took on the graduate from the orphanage. Also, the kind woman helped the orphan get her own small but cosy apartment. Celia visited Mrs. Dennings every weekend, buying her favourite sweets each time, which were her weakness. "So, Celia, how's work going? Sister says you're making great progress, and if you're determined, you'll easily become a manager." "Yes, I'm trying. Besides, I can't let you down, Mrs. Dennings." "Well, have you found a groom for yourself yet? Why are you hiding your pretty eyes? I know it's a young thing. Anything can happen." "No, I don't have time to think about grooms. I want to stand on my own 2 feet first, and then we'll see," Celia evasively replied, not wanting to develop such an uncomfortable topic further. Mrs. Dennings understandingly nodded her head, hiding a smile at the corners of her lips. She loved Celia very much and wished the girl only good. One day, Celia arrived at work and Betsy ran up to her right away. "Where are you messing around? Hurry up! Look how many people there are. It's Friday. By the way, your admirer is sitting there waiting for you." "Who's that? That man in the corner?" "Yes. Don't you see he's staring at you? He comes every day and you don't even acknowledge him." "Come on, Betsy. He's at least 10 years older than me. Why do I need him?" Celia retorted and went to the kitchen to pick up the next order. "Okay, maybe he isn't too young, but he's certainly more reliable and prudent than your peers. With him, you'll be like behind the rock," Betsy said after her departing friend. Celia didn't know the name of her secret admirer, but she knew that the man came every day for a month, invariably ordering a cup of coffee. "Thank you very much, Celia," the stranger said. "You're welcome," replied the waitress with a charming smile. The stranger smiled back, and Celia felt warmth and tenderness in his eyes. As she returned to the counter, she felt as though she were floating on cloud 9, flattered by such attention from a customer. Oh, if only there were more like him. Look at those drunk rich guys at the nearby table. They've completely lost their manners. "It's disgusting, but we still have to serve them," whispered Betsy, and nodded in the direction. Celia looked over and saw the impudent group of wealthy young men spending their parents' money, laughing and speaking louder than necessary. Cafe visitors glanced at the young men from time to time, but didn't attempt to object. Some were afraid, while others simply didn't want to invite trouble. Only the visitor who drank his usual evening coffee looked at the rich kids with obvious disapproval. Meanwhile, Celia decided to make a remark to the disturbers of peace. "I'm sorry, but could you please speak a little quieter? You're not the only ones in the cafe and you're disturbing other visitors." "As we want, we'll speak. We paid for our order, so what complaints could anyone have against us? And everyone who is not satisfied can leave," one of the rich guys sarcastically replied, who apparently was the troublemaker in the group. "It's not up to you to decide who belongs here and who doesn't," Celia replied, irritated by the impudent tone of the rude man. "Hey, who do you think you are, acting like a queen here, huh? You're just a regular servant. Bring us our order." Celia decided not to argue and not to escalate the unpleasant situation any further. However, the rich man, who was offended by the waitress's comments, harboured anger towards her, waiting for a convenient moment to take it out on the hapless girl. After finishing her shift, Celia hurried home, unaware that a trio of impudent men had followed her, eager to take revenge on the defiant waitress. "Hey, you! What's your name? Stop!" one of the guys yelled, grabbing the girl's hand. "Let me go! How dare you!" shouted Celia, looking around frantically. But there was no one to help her. Betsy lived in another part of the city and was probably halfway home by now. Meanwhile, the men surrounded the girl, becoming more and more aggressive. Suddenly, a tall, burly figure appeared behind them and began pushing the drunken men aside. A fight broke out, and Celia's defender had a tough time. The girl wanted to help the stranger and began screaming and calling for help. The rich men were momentarily taken aback and started looking around. This delay was enough for Celia and her defender to break free from the clutches of the enraged men. Turning the corner, they ran through the courtyards to quickly get away from their... Only when they were finally safe did they catch their breath. Throughout all this time, Celia did not see the face of her saviour, but under the light of a street lamp, she was able to examine him more closely. To Celia's surprise, it was the same man who always drank coffee. "Thank you. You dealt with them quickly," she said shyly. "To be honest, I got my fair share too. I got into a fight like a little boy. Who knows how it would have ended if you hadn't helped," the stranger replied. "Oh, your jacket is torn at the back. It's very noticeable. You know what? Let's go to my place. I live nearby. I'll make you some tea and we'll fix up your jacket," Celia suggested. "I'm not against it. Let me introduce myself. My name is Brent. And yours is Celia, I already know." The man smiled and took the girl's hand. On the way to her house, Celia and Brent chatted about the details of the recent incident. "Well, here I live. Come in. Of course, it's not a mansion, but it's livable," Celia said, inviting Brent to the bathroom to freshen up and fix himself up. After making delicious tea, the girl examined the jacket and concluded that it could be mended. Under Brent's enthusiastic gaze, she deftly wielded a needle and thread, and in one moment made a couple of thin stitches that concealed the hole in the back. "There you go. You can't see the seam if you don't look closely. It's neat and it won't come undone," the girl joked, helping Brent put on his jacket. "Thank you very much, Celia. You saved me. I don't even know how to sew. I would probably have thrown the jacket away, but it's not good because it's a quality thing," Brent said, heading for the door. As a farewell, Celia stood on tiptoe and hugged her saviour, blushing instantly. Then, as Brent walked out of the entrance, she watched him until he disappeared around the corner. The next day, Celia told her friend Betsy about the incident with the rich visitors. "You see, Celia, I've told you he is a real man, and he didn't lose his cool in a difficult situation. Believe me, you're as safe as behind a rock with a guy like that," said her friend, from whom Celia could not hide an impish glint in her eyes. Celia eagerly awaited the evening to find out if Brent would come today, or if he would break his habit. But when the clock struck 6, the girl saw that the table where the man usually sat was empty. Finishing the rest of her shift, the girl went outside and saw Brent walking towards her, holding a huge bouquet of flowers in his hands. Taken aback, Celia was speechless, but the man didn't lose his composure, and, taking the girl by the hand, offered to take her for a walk. That evening was unforgettable. Brent turned out to be a very gallant and attentive suitor, with whom she felt incredible emotional comfort and warmth. As it turned out, the man was a long-distance truck driver, and he could tell many stories about different countries and the things he had seen during his travels. As they said their goodbyes, Celia and Brent kissed and agreed to meet again the next day. From then on, the couple started seeing each other every day, except when Brent had to leave for work. Every time he was away on the road, Celia worried and got nervous. She felt that she had found someone she could lean on and know that everything was all right. She was drawn to Brent every minute, and she knew that the feelings were mutual. He loved her sincerely and took care of her, as evidenced by his every gesture and look. Sleepless nights, warm embraces, kisses, and romantic rendezvous slowly and surely led the young couple to the wedding. However, Celia always had a feeling of understatement. She felt that something was bothering Brent from within, and he didn't know how to talk about it. One evening, sitting on a bench under a spreading maple tree in the park, Brent gathered the courage to tell Celia about his past. "Celia, I didn't know how to tell you all this time. You see, I was married. My wife, she died during childbirth, and I was left alone with 3 kids." "3?" Celia whispered in shock. "Yes, Celia, I have 3 kids. Twin boys, Jack and Blair, and the youngest, Kate. My wife died giving birth to her." "How did you manage all this time alone?" asked Celia, who couldn't get over such news. "Well, I got used to it. My mother left me in an orphanage and ran away with a biker many years ago. She didn't need me either, just like your mother didn't need you. But I will never put the children in an orphanage. Celia, you probably won't marry me now, will you, with such a burden?" Brent asked, sadly smiling. "Well, if that's an official proposal, I'll go for it." "Why not? I'm an orphan myself, and I know that kids need a mother, especially little ones," Celia said. "Thank you, my dear. I was sure you would understand me," Brent said joyfully and hugged his beloved girlfriend. No matter how much Betsy tried to dissuade Celia from such a serious step, it was all in vain. "Celia, why do you need this man with so many children? Aren't you thinking about your own future? Are you ready to raise someone else's kids?" "Well, you quickly changed your mind, Betsy. You were the one who advised me to be with him, and now you're trying to talk me out of marriage," Celia said, confident in her choice. Despite all Betsy's exhortations, Brent and Celia got married. Even before getting married, Brent introduced Celia to his children. She was very pleased with the meeting and was amazed at how well behaved and polite the children turned out to be. For the twins, she became their best friend and older sister, while little Kate called her Mum. Tears welled up in Celia's eyes. At first, married life was difficult. After all, living alone with 3 small children was not easy. But Celia considered herself a strong girl and eventually got used to everything, not noticing the family troubles and worries. She believed that with love and understanding, family happiness would come on its own, eagerly awaiting her husband's return from his every trip. Celia had quit her job at the cafe and dedicated all of her time to raising the children, whom she cherished. One evening during dinner, she noticed a scar on her husband's hand in the shape of a cross. She had long wanted to ask where it came from. "Annie, what's that mark on your hand?" she asked. "Well, my childhood friend Andrew and I decided to make a mark of loyalty and friendship. A cross on the hand, like friends forever. We used a hot nail to make it. He has one just like it," Brent answered, embarrassed about his childishness. "Where is he now, your friend?" Celia asked. "I don't know, Celia. Life scattered us in different directions after the orphanage. Everyone has their own life now," Brent replied, unaware of the important role this confession would play in the future. Unfortunately, Celia's family happiness did not last long. Only 3 years full of love, care, and mutual understanding. Celia had grown attached to the children, and they all called her Mum in unison. It seemed that happiness was within reach. But misfortune came to Celia's home uninvited, plunging her life into a sea of sorrow and suffering. During his last trip, Brent's heavy trailer collided head-on with a dump truck who had crossed over into oncoming traffic. It was early morning and the dump truck driver simply fell asleep at the wheel, unaware that in a moment he would become the cause of a terrible accident. The news of her husband's death shocked Celia. The woman did not know how to cope with the overwhelming grief and relied solely on antidepressants and calming injections. She vaguely remembered the funeral, and all subsequent days seemed like a painful nightmare to her. Betsy, who had been by her friend's side the whole time, supported her as best she could, although sometimes she suggested completely unacceptable things to Celia. "Celia, put the kids in an orphanage. But where will you go with 3 of them? Huh? You'll wear yourself out. You'll ruin yourself and them. I won't give my children to anyone. They are mine, understand? They can't go to an orphanage. I'll give up my last breath, but I'll put them on their feet. They are my flesh and blood. In memory of Brent, you know," Celia said, crying. Betsy just shook her head, understanding that she couldn't dissuade her friend. A year flew by unnoticed. During this time, Celia wore the prescribed mourning and lit candles in the church to make Brent feel more at peace in the afterlife. Realizing that she needed to get the children on their feet, the young widow decided to find a job. However, she didn't return to the cafe. The schedule didn't suit her. Thanks to Betsy's help, Celia landed a job as an assistant secretary in a real estate company. The work was no easier than her previous job at the cafe, and she had plenty of worries. But that was all Celia needed. Immersed in work, she had no time to think about Brent and her difficult fate. Days went by, and the woman gradually got used to the rhythm of office work and became a valued member of the team. One day, while bringing documents for the department head to sign, Celia noticed a button on the sleeve of his shirt had come undone, revealing a scar identical to her husband's. Overwhelmed, she dropped the papers. "I'm sorry, is everything okay?" Andrew asked. I don't know how to say this. The scar on your hand, you know? I've seen it before." "It can't be. Do you happen to know Brent Murphy?" Celia asked, stuttering. "Of course. But how do you know that name?" Andrew asked excitedly. Celia, unable to hold back tears, sat down on a chair and through sobs told her boss everything about Brent, the accident, and his 3 children. At the end of her story, Andrew had tears in his eyes. He realized that he was facing the wife of his deceased friend Brent, with whom they had been bound by a childhood oath. If not for this accidental discovery, they would have worked side by side and never known of each other's existence. Andrew, hearing that Celia had 3 children, immediately raised her salary and began to help her in every way he could, feeling guilty of not finding his friend earlier. He began to visit Celia's home often, helping her with the children. Andrew even resembled Brent, and little Kate always called him Daddy. Unbeknownst to herself, Celia began to have strange feelings for Andrew, starting with respect and ending with more serious emotions. Less than a month after their memorable conversation in the office, a special bond was established between the two, as if they had known each other for many years. "Celia, I've been thinking about this for a long time. You see, I'm lonely, with no family or children. I've built my career, and there was no time to think about a family. In short, will you marry me?" Andrew asked, shyly like a boy. For him, Celia and the children of his deceased friend had long become like his own family. The woman agreed with joy. It was not about the help, but the fact that she liked Andrew more and more every day. They had a modest wedding, holding a solemn evening in the same cafe where Celia had once met Brent. Even the caregiver from the orphanage, Mrs. Dennings, came. She approved of Celia's choice, and Andrew was very likable to her. "He is just as honourable a man as Brent. You can have no doubt, my dear. I see it in his eyes. He is very kind," said the woman, wiping tears of joy. And Celia had no doubt. She loved Andrew, and he loved her too. There is No doubt that looking down from heaven, Brent rejoices for them and wishes his best friend and Celia only happiness and faith in a bright future. And Jack, Blair and little Kate will never be in need of anything. For Andrew, they are like his own children. After all, the oath they gave each other with Brent many years ago is not subject to time or life's difficulties.